My mother lifted her champagne glass high enough for everyone in the private dining room to notice. "Finally," she said, smiling toward my younger sister, Courtney. "One daughter worth celebrating." A few people gave polite laughs because they clearly thought she was making some harmless family joke. Then Mom turned toward me. Maybe her useless sister should take notes. My father laughed loudly enough to make it worse. I didn't look at either of them. I looked at Courtney. For 1 second, she had the chance to stop it. She could have told Mom that was enough. Instead, she gave an embarrassed little smile and said, "Mom, you're terrible," in the tone people use when they secretly enjoy a compliment. Then, less than 10 minutes later, Courtney stood beside her new boss and told a group of executives that she had personally fought to secure the West Bridge renewal. That was when I took out my phone. I typed 4 words to Daniel Mercer, the regional vice president standing across the room. "Do it tonight." He read the message, lifted his eyes to mine, and stood. Courtney watched him walk toward her, then turned to me, the color drained from her face. "What did you just do?" she whispered. I slipped my phone back into my bag. "Nothing that wasn't already waiting for you. Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from today, because this story became much bigger than one ugly toast at a promotion dinner. And if you enjoy stories where people eventually have to answer for the chonches they make, subscribe to the channel and stay with me, because Courtney had no idea that the worst thing she could do that night was make me stop protecting the delay that had been protecting her. The dinner was being held in a private room at a restaurant in downtown Columbus. Bright Path Logistics had reserved it for a small group of employees who had recently been promoted or were about to step into expanded roles, and each of them had been allowed to invite a few family members. Courtney had invited Mom, Dad, and me. She had made a point of telling me twice that Daniel Mercer would be there, as though I should be impressed by the presence of a regional vice president. I had simply said I knew who Daniel was. Courtney had laughed and told me that, of course, I knew the name because she had probably mentioned him before. I let that answer stand. I had learned a long time ago that correcting my family about my job rarely improved anything. It only created another opportunity for Mom to tell me that Courtney was better with people while I was better with paperwork. I worked for Westbridge Home, a regional retail chain headquartered in Ohio, and my title was Director of Strategic Vendor Operations. The title sounded more glamorous than the daily work usually was. Most days involved performance reports, late deliveries, service failures, corrective plans, meetings, and determining whether a vendor problem was temporary or expensive enough to require a change. Daniel knew me because BrightPath was one of Westbridge's logistics vendors. We had sat across from each other in quarterly reviews. We had disagreed professionally more than once. We had also managed to do that without ever needing to become friends. Courtney knew all of this. My parents did not, mostly because they had never asked enough questions to understand what I actually did. When I entered the private room that evening, Daniel spotted me almost immediately. He gave me the brief nod people give someone they know from work, but do not intend to drag into a business conversation at a social event. I returned it and kept walking. Courtney was near the bar, surrounded by coworkers, wearing a cream-colored suit and holding herself with the slightly brighter posture she always had when people were watching. She looked happy, and despite everything that had happened between us over the years, I was glad for her. That is one of the inconvenient truths about family. You can resent someone, distrust parts of them, and still remember exactly what their face looked like when they were 13 and afraid to walk home alone. Mom had already taken photographs from almost every possible angle. She waved me over and immediately adjusted the front of my blouse as if I were still 16. "Try to look excited," she said quietly. "Tonight is important to Courtney." I moved her hand away from my collar. "I am excited for her." Mom gave me the look she used whenever my answer was technically acceptable but emotionally insufficient. "Then show it." I almost asked what expression she wanted me to rehearse, but I decided against it. That was another habit I had developed over the years. I had become very good at deciding which arguments were worth the energy required to finish them. Dad was easier to deal with, at least on the surface. He hugged me, asked about traffic, then immediately asked whether I remembered the date of his follow-up appointment the next month. I did. I always did. My phone calendar, my old paper planner, and apparently some permanent section of my brain contained more information about my parents' appointments than either of them seemed interested in remembering. I told him the date, and he smiled. "See, this is why we keep you around." He meant it as a joke. At the time, I even smiled. Later, that sentence would stay with me for reasons Dad could not have understood yet. Before dinner, BrightPath's leadership said a few words about each employee being recognized. Courtney's manager praised her client relationships, her ability to calm difficult accounts, and the growth she had generated over the previous year. All of that sounded reasonable. Courtney was good at sales. I had never denied that. Then a slide appeared behind the speaker listing several highlights from her promotion case. Westbridge was near the top. The wording said she had secured long-term retention of the account. My stomach tightened, but my face did not change. I had seen similar language earlier that week, and Daniel and I had already discussed it. Westbridge had not made a long-term commitment. BrightPath had a .score conditional extension while performance problems were being reviewed. Those two things were not interchangeable. Daniel had called me that afternoon after receiving Westbridge's clarification. He had been careful with his words because Courtney was my sister and both of us knew the situation could become messy. He told me Courtney's promotion was not based solely on Westbridge. She had other strong accounts, solid numbers, and positive leadership feedback, but Westbridge had been presented internally as one of her strongest retention successes. And Daniel needed to understand why Courtney's description did not match the client's documentation. He intended to speak with her Monday morning rather than disrupt a celebration that had already been planned. I told him that was reasonable. Then he added one condition. If Courtney continued presenting the Westbridge relationship as a completed renewal in front of leadership that night, he would address it immediately. I said I understood. That was why I stayed quiet when I first saw the slide. I was not there to police my sister's celebration. Westbridge had already corrected the record through official channels. Daniel had the information he needed. My responsibility ended there. At least that was what I believed until Mom stood up with her champagne glass and decided the evening needed one more performance. Her first sentence about finally having one daughter worth celebrating drew nervous laughter. The second sentence landed differently. Maybe her useless sister should take notes. I heard one of Courtney's coworkers stop laughing halfway through. A woman beside Daniel lowered her glass. My father gave his loud little chuckle, the one he used whenever Mom said something mean enough that silence might force him to acknowledge it. I felt heat rise under my collar, but humiliation was not the strongest thing I felt. Mostly, I was watching Courtney. There had been other moments like that throughout our lives, and Courtney knew exactly how to stop them when she wanted to. She could redirect Mom with one sentence. She could make Dad change the subject. She could turn a room with a joke because people naturally followed her attention. That night, she looked at me, looked at Mom, and chose not to do it. "Mom, you're terrible," she said, smiling. Then she accepted another hug. In that moment, I understood that the joke was useful to her. The more ridiculous my career looked beside hers, the more impressive her promotion became. I still would not have texted Daniel because of that alone. That distinction matters to me even now. My mother insulting me did not give me the right to use my job to hurt my sister's career. What happened next did. A few minutes later, one of Courtney's coworkers asked her about Westbridge. Courtney straightened instantly. "That one was rough," she said. They were practically halfway out the door, but I fought for that renewal. Someone congratulated her. Courtney laughed and added, "Clients don't stay because of spreadsheets. They stay because somebody knows how to keep the relationship alive." Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second. Most people would never have noticed. I did. 3 weeks earlier, I had written to the Bright Path account team in language so clear that nobody could reasonably misunderstand it. The current term was a conditional extension. No multi-year renewal had been approved. They should not represent it otherwise. Courtney had replied, "Understood." Later, she had called me privately and complained that I was being overly technical. I told her contract status was not a matter of personality. Now she was standing in front of her leadership, repeating the exact claim she had already been told was wrong. Across the room, Daniel heard it too. He did not react immediately. He did not need to. His expressions simply became more attentive. I remembered our conversation that afternoon and understood what he was waiting for. He had promised not to turn the dinner into a workplace confrontation unless Courtney continued the claim she just had. So, I took out my phone. I did not write, "Fire her." I did not write, "Take away the promotion." I did not tell Daniel what decision BrightPath should make about one of its employees. I wrote exactly what the situation required. "Do it tonight." 4 words telling him that there was no longer any reason to protect Monday morning from Friday night. Daniel read the message. He placed his glass on the table and stood. He did not announce anything. He did not ask for everyone's attention. He walked directly to Courtney and said quietly, "Can I speak with you privately?" Courtney's smile disappeared. She looked at Daniel, then at me, and something passed across her face that I had not seen when Mom called me useless. Fear, not confusion. That difference mattered. If Courtney had genuinely believed everything she had said about Westbridge, Daniel asking for a private word should have puzzled her. Instead, she immediately looked at me. "What did you just do?" she whispered. "Nothing that wasn't already waiting for you." Daniel guided her toward a small hallway outside the dining room. Mom stared after them and then turned on me. "What was that?" she demanded. I reached for my bag. "You should ask Courtney." Mom stepped closer. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You cannot let your sister have one night without turning everything into something about you." Dad came over and lowered his voice as if volume were the problem. "Lauren, whatever this is, couldn't it wait until tomorrow?" "It was waiting until tomorrow," I said. Neither of them understood what I meant. Mom folded her arms. "Then why couldn't you leave it alone?" I looked toward the hallway where Courtney had disappeared with Daniel because she just repeated something she had already been told wasn't true. Dad frowned. "What are you talking about?" I almost explained. Then I stopped. West Burbridge's relationship with Bright Path was not dinner table information just because my sister worked there. Ask Courtney what she said about Westbridge. I told him if she wants you to know the rest, she can explain it. Mom's face hardened. "There you go again, making everything sound important because it has to do with your job." That sentence should have surprised me. It did not. I picked up my coat. "Good night, Mom." She called my name as I walked away, but I did not turn around. I was angry, but I was not out of control. I had already done the only thing I intended to do that evening. The rest belonged to Bright Path. On the drive home, my hands stayed steady on the wheel. What bothered me was not the word useless. Mom had used different versions of it for years. Difficult, too serious, not ambitious in the right way, better behind the scenes. The part I could not stop thinking about was Courtney's face when Daniel stood up. She had not looked surprised by the possibility that there was a problem. She had looked terrified that I had allowed the problem to reach her. At home, I changed out of my work clothes, poured a glass of water, and opened the notebook I kept beside my desk. Documentation was not glamorous, but it had saved me from too many misunderstandings to ignore. I wrote down the approximate time of Mom's toast, then Courtney's comment about fighting for the Westbridge renewal, then the time I sent Daniel the message, then the time he asked Courtney to step outside. I did not know yet whether any of it would matter. I only knew that when people became emotional, memory became convenient. Mine included. My phone buzzed before I finished. Courtney, you had no right to talk to my boss. I read it twice. What struck me was what she did not ask. She did not ask why Daniel wanted to speak with her. She did not ask whether Westbridge had changed its position. She did not ask whether something new had happened with the account. Her first instinct was to make my contact with Daniel the problem. I typed back, Daniel and I communicate about Westbridge as part of my job. Now that. The typing indicator appeared immediately, disappeared, then returned. You did this because Mom embarrassed you? I stared at the screen. There it was already. The first draft of a story I had not realized Courtney was preparing to tell. I wrote, the Westbridge issue existed before dinner. Keep family matters out of it. Her next message came less than a minute later. If you just cost me my promotion, I swear I'll make sure they know why you did it. I put the phone down and looked at the notes I had just written. For years, when Courtney and Mom rewrote a family argument, I usually let them. I told myself I did not need to win every version of every story. I had a career, a home, a life that existed, whether they understood it or not. That night, for the first time, the instinct that had always seemed mature suddenly looked careless. Courtney was no longer rewriting something that would disappear after Sunday dinner. She was preparing to carry our family's version of me into my workplace. So, I picked the phone back up, opened my work calendar, and began reconstructing every direct conversation I had ever had with my sister about Bright Path. There was one in February that made me stop. I remembered exactly what I had said, and for the first time that night, I wondered whether Courtney had been waiting for it to become useful. Courtney called me at 7:23 the next morning. I knew the exact time because I had already been awake for almost an hour, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, my work calendar, and the notes I had made after the dinner. I had gone to bed late and slept badly, but I was not waiting for an apology. Courtney had never been good at apologizing when admitting fault would change the balance between us. I expected questions about Daniel or Westbridge. Instead, the moment I answered, she said, "What did you tell him?" There was no hello and still no mention of what Mom had said to me. I looked out the kitchen window at the wet pavement below my condo and said, "If you're asking about Daniel, I'm not discussing Bright Path business with you on a family call." She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Don't do that. Don't suddenly become corporate with me after you texted my boss in the middle of my promotion dinner." I reminded her that Daniel and I communicated because Bright Path serviced West Burbridge. She already knew that. Courtney went quiet for half a second, then changed the argument. "You've always hated it when Mom was proud of me." There were a dozen Otfursers I could have given her. I could have reminded her that I had driven 3 hours to attend her college graduation, Rosh Hashanah, when Dad had the flu and Mom refused to leave him alone. I could have mentioned the weekend I helped her move into her first apartment, or the nights I stayed up reading her early sales presentations because she was terrified of speaking in front of senior managers. I could have told her that resenting the way Mom compared us was not the same thing as resenting Courtney's success. But I had spent too many years explaining obvious distinctions to people committed to misunderstanding them. "This is exactly why I'm not discussing the account with you," I said. "If you believe I acted improperly, use the proper process." Her voice sharpened. "Maybe I will." I told her that was her choice. Then I ended the call before she could turn the conversation into another trial about whether I had smiled enough at her accomplishments. For most of my adult life, my family had treated competence like a household utility. Nobody admired the electricity when the lights came on. They only noticed when something stopped working. I was the electricity. When Dad needed the date of a specialist appointment, he called me. When Mom could not find the confirmation for a hotel reservation she had booked herself, she called me. When an insurance company sent them a letter, neither of them wanted the photograph landed in my messages with, "Can you figure this out?" None of those things were burdens individually. Most took 5 or 10 minutes. That was part of why the pattern had lasted so long. It was easier to solve the problem than explain why the problem was not automatically mine. I had been the organized one since I was a teenager. Mom gave me my first real planner when I was 16, a navy blue book with stiff covers and little monthly tabs. She had laughed when I started writing everything in it. Dad's follow-up after a minor knee procedure. The due date for a utility payment. Mom was afraid she would forget. Courtney's orthodontist appointment. My own exam schedule squeezed into the remaining spaces. Back then, being the person who remembered things felt almost like a compliment. Mom would tap the planner and tell relatives, "Lauren keeps this family running." I liked hearing that. I liked knowing I was dependable. I did not understand yet how quickly admiration for a skill could turn into entitlement to it. Years later, the objects changed, but the expectation did not. I used a phone calendar for work, but I still kept a paper planner on my desk because I liked seeing a month laid out in front of me. Somehow, Mom and Dad's information kept finding its way onto those pages. Earlier that year, Dad had needed help sorting out an insurance authorization. I spent part of a Saturday reading the paperwork called the insurer Monday morning and sent him a short list of exactly what he needed to ask his doctor's office for. 2 days later, Courtney sent Mom a bouquet because Mom had complained she was having a stressful week. Mom photographed the flowers from 3 different angles and posted one online with a caption about having the most thoughtful daughter in the world. I remember seeing the post while I was on hold with Dad's insurance company for the second time. I did not feel jealous of the flowers. What bothered me was how perfectly the family had divided us. Courtney created moments people could admire. I made problems disappear before anyone had to look at them. I had helped maintain that arrangement. That was something I was less willing to admit before everything happened. I rarely told Mom when helping them was inconvenient. I almost never said, "I'm busy. You can handle this." I did not do those things because I was afraid they would stop loving me. I did them because I was fast, capable, and impatient with unnecessary chaos. If Mom spent 40 minutes complaining about a hotel confirmation I could find in 4 minutes, I usually found it. There was also pride buried inside that efficiency. Somewhere along the way, being the person everyone needed had become one of the ways I reassured myself that the family's ranking system was ridiculous. Courtney could receive all the applause she wanted. When something actually mattered, they called me. Courtney and I had not always been opponents in that system. That is another part of the story that would be easier if it were different. If she had been cruel from childhood, I could have filed her away years ago as someone I happened to share parents with. But when we were young, she was the person who slept on the floor of my room during thunderstorms, even though she insisted she was not afraid. When she was 13, a group of girls at school decided she was an easy target for reasons that probably mattered desperately to 13-year-olds and made no sense to adults. Courtney stopped taking the bus because those girls rode the same route. She told Mom she wanted exercise and started walking home instead. I found out the truth when I saw her standing behind the gym one afternoon, pretending to search her backpack while she waited for the girls to leave. I was 17 and had recently gotten permission to drive Dad's old sedan. For almost 3 weeks, I picked Courtney up after school. I parked a block away because she did not want anyone to think her older sister was rescuing her. She would get into the passenger seat, throw her backpack on the floor, and tell me about anything, except the reason I was there. We ate fries in the car. We complained about Mom. Courtney once made me promise I would never tell anyone she had cried in a bathroom stall because one of those girls had called her pathetic. I kept that promise. Eventually, the situation passed, as those situations often do, and Courtney went back to the bus. Neither of us ever mentioned those afternoons to our parents. When I left for college the next year, Courtney climbed into the passenger seat of my packed car before I drove away. She was trying not to cry and failing. Don't become one of those people who only comes home at Christmas, she said. I promised I would not. For a long time, I kept that promise more faithfully than either of us probably deserved. That was why I had answered some of her late-night calls as adults, even when I knew better. It was also why I had a harder time accepting what she eventually became willing to do. There was always a part of me that remembered the girl who trusted me with the things she could not tell anyone else. Our relationship changed gradually rather than dramatically. Courtney grew into someone who was excellent at reading rooms. She knew how to make a new person feel included, how to remember the personal detail a client mentioned 3 months earlier, how to make a story about a routine success sound like an event. Mom adored that quality. It gave her something visible to celebrate. Courtney's first real commission check became a family dinner. Her first major client became a photograph beside a cake Mom ordered with the company colors. When Courtney received an industry award from her employer, Mom told people about it for months. My career developed more quietly. I started in operations after college, moved into vendor management, then into strategic operations. The work suited me because I liked systems more than performance. I liked finding the point where a process was breaking and fixing it before the failure became expensive. I was promoted several times, but I learned early that telling Mom rarely produced the reaction I wanted. When I became a senior manager, she asked whether that meant I finally supervised real employees instead of reports. When I later became a director, she said, "That sounds impressive." Then immediately asked whether Courtney might make director too, because she's always been such a natural leader. After that, I stopped trying to make my career legible to them. If Mom asked how work was, I said fine. If Dad asked whether I was busy, I said always. If they wanted to believe I sat somewhere moving numbers between spreadsheets all day, I let them. At the time, I thought that was maturity. I was not going to compete with my younger sister for parental applause at 38 years. Odd. What I did not understand was that silence leaves space and someone else will eventually fill it. That was why my parents had been so surprised when Daniel acknowledged me at the dinner. Courtney had not been surprised. She knew exactly who I was in relation to Britt Path. Daniel Mercer was not my friend, mentor, secret ally, or anything else my family might later imagine. He was BrightPath's regional vice president, and I had been in enough quarterly reviews with him to know his habit of tapping a pen against his thumb. When numbers did not add up, he knew that I preferred documented commitments to optimistic summaries. I knew that he disliked surprises from clients. Our relationship was professional, occasionally tense, and useful precisely because neither of us pretended it was anything else. My parents did not know Daniel because they did not know the names of most companies West Burbridge worked with. Courtney knew. In fact, she knew more about my job than she had ever admitted in front of them. That should have bothered me sooner. At the time, I told myself it was simply another boundary. Courtney had business reasons to understand my position. Mom did not. There was no rule saying every family member had to receive the same amount of professional information. What I had not paid enough attention to were the phrases Mom used when describing me. Lauren mostly handles paperwork. She doesn't really make those big decisions. Courtney's the one who deals with people. Those sentences sounded like Mom's familiar simplifications. She reduced everything to categories she understood. Courtney was social. I was serious. Courtney was ambitious. I was stable. Courtney created opportunities. I cleaned up details. I had heard versions of that story for so long that I stopped asking where Mom was getting the newer details. The morning after the dinner, I began noticing the wording differently. Mom did not work in my industry. Dad barely knew the difference between procurement and operations. Yet somehow, Mom had developed a very specific belief that I had little influence over vendor decisions. I could understand her not knowing what I did. What I could not immediately explain was why she sounded so certain about what I did not do. I did not have time to sit with that question because my work email chimed just before 9. This message from my manager, Karen Hull. The subject line was short, Bright Path Conflict Concern. I opened it and read the first paragraph twice. Bright Path had contacted Westbridge regarding a potential conflict connected to my family relationship with one of their employees. Because I had disclosed Courtney as my sister. When she became involved with the account, our compliance team was reviewing the allegation under the existing disclosure record. Karen's tone was neutral. She was not accusing me of anything. That almost made the email more serious. Processes like that did not require anger. They only required a reason to begin. I called Karen immediately. She told me the concern appeared to relate to the timing of Daniel's conversation with Courtney after my text the previous night. Brightpath had not made a formal accusation against me as a company, but Courtney had raised questions internally, and those questions now involved a Westbridge employee. Karen said, compliance wanted a clean chronology before anyone reached conclusions. You did the right thing disclosing the relationship in the first place, she told me. Now we document everything else the same way. I appreciated that she did not promise me the review was meaningless. She also did not treat me as guilty. She asked whether I had ever communicated directly with Courtney about Bright Path outside ordinary business channels. My hand stopped over the notebook on my desk. Relevant communications? I asked anything about the account. Karen said calls, messages, advice, information. We're not asking for your private family conversations. We need to know whether there was contact that could reasonably be characterized as outside the account process. There it was. The February call. I had already written it into my chronology before Karen contacted me because I knew it existed. I had no intention of hiding it, but remembering something privately and explaining it to compliance were different experiences. Courtney had called me after Britpath received a corrective action plan. She had been panicked. I had refused to tell her anything about Westbridge's internal discussions. Then, before ending the conversation, I had told her to read the plan again and focus on the backlog section. That information was already in a document Brightpath possessed. I had not given her a secret, but I had answered as her sister when I should have stayed entirely in my professional lane. Yes, I said. There was one conversation in February I want included. Karen paused only long enough to make a note. Good. Put it in the chronology exactly as you remember it. Compliance may want any messages around it if they exist. After the call, I sat at my desk and looked at the planner beside my keyboard. Mom had given me versions of that object for years, long after I was perfectly capable of buying my own. She still liked to joke that nobody in the family knew where they were supposed to be, unless Lauren wrote it down. Until that morning, I had mostly heard affection inside the joke. Now I was beginning to hear the expectation underneath it. My phone buzzed again. It was Mom. For one irrational second, I thought she might be calling to apologize for the dinner. Instead, she asked whether I remembered which week Dad's follow-up appointment was scheduled for next month because she could not find the card. I closed my eyes. The answer was written 3 lines down on the open page in front of me. I told her the date. See, she said brightly, as if the previous night had never happened. I knew you'd know. After we hung up, I stared at the planner and felt something shift that had nothing to do with Courtney's promotion. My mother could call me useless in a room full of strangers on Friday night and still call me Saturday morning because she expected me to remember the details of her life better than she did. I had always treated those contradictions as proof that her opinion did not matter. Maybe that had been convenient for me too, if I remained useful enough. I never had to ask whether useful was the same thing as valued. I turned back to my laptop and began writing the chronology compliance had requested. Dates first, then meetings, then every direct contact I could remember with Courtney about Brightpath. I had no idea yet what davjan she was telling her company. I only knew that if she wanted to make our family dynamic part of a professional investigation, I was done relying on anyone's memory of who had said what. By lunchtime, I had reached February. I typed the date of Courtney's call, then stopped. Because as soon as I wrote down what I had actually said to her, I remembered something else about that conversation. Courtney had not sounded surprised that I knew what Bright Path needed to fix. She had sounded relieved that after pushing hard enough, I had finally answered her directly. The February call was easier to remember once I stopped thinking about it as a family conversation and started reconstructing the weeks that had led to it. Courtney had not suddenly appeared in my professional life. Britt Path had been working with Westbridge before she became the primary account contact. And the moment I learned she was moving on to our account, I had sent an email to my manager in compliance. I did not bury the relationship in a casual message or assume everyone already knew my last name matched hers. I wrote plainly that Courtney Keene was my younger sister and that I wanted the connection documented before she participated in any decisions involving West Burbridge. Karen forwarded the disclosure to the appropriate people, and we agreed on boundaries that made sense. I could continue overseeing operational performance because that was part of my role, but I would not negotiate Bright Path's pricing, determine Courtney's compensation, or act as the final authority on renewal. Those decisions involved procurement, finance, contract management, and senior leadership. I remember feeling almost excessive about the disclosure at the time. After what happened later, I was grateful I had been. Our relationship with Britt Path had been stable enough when Courtney first took over the account. They were not our best vendor, but they were not a disaster either. They handled a significant portion of regional distribution for West Burbridge, moving inventory between facilities and stores across several states. Most customers never thought about that kind of work unless something went wrong. If a store had the right merchandise on the right day, logistics was invisible. When pallets sat in the wrong warehouse for 4 extra days-ish and promotions launched with empty shelves, suddenly everyone wanted to know who had failed. My job was to understand whether the answer was bad luck, a temporary bottleneck, or a system that had stopped functioning. By late January, Bright Path's numbers were moving in the wrong direction. Shipments were arriving late more often. A backlog developed at one of their facilities. Several Westbridge stores reported incomplete deliveries tied to the same distribution lane. None of those problems by itself justified ending a major vendor relationship, but they formed a pattern I could not ignore. I sent the performance scorecard to the Bright Path account team through the normal channel, copied the appropriate people on our side, and requested a corrective action plan. Courtney was included because she managed the relationship. I did not call her privately before sending it. I did not soften the numbers because she was my sister. If anything, I was more careful than usual about making sure every statement in the scorecard could be supported by the underlying data. Courtney called me that afternoon anyway. "How bad is this really?" she asked after barely saying hello. I was still at my desk looking at the same report she had received. "The scorecard tells you how bad it is." She made an impatient sound. "Lauren, I read the scorecard. I'm asking what people are actually saying." I knew what she wanted. She wanted the version that happened after the meeting ended, the private tone, the internal confidence level, the part of any business relationship that never fits neatly into a report. "I'm not giving you an internal read. I said your team has the same performance data we're working from." Courtney lowered her voice as if someone might be listening beside her. "I'm not asking you to leak a board meeting. I'm asking if we're about to lose the account." I told her I did not know because no final decision had been made. She said, "Come on, you always know where these things are going." I answered, "And you know why I'm not having this conversation with you." She was annoyed, but she backed off. For the next few weeks, Bright Path worked through the corrective plan. Their operations people attended calls, explained where the backlog had formed, and promised specific changes. Some metrics improved, others did not. Courtney was present for most of those discussions, but she rarely spoke about the mechanics. Her strength was relationship management. She knew when to apologize, when to acknowledge frustration, and when to make a client feel as though a problem had already become yesterday's news. There was value in that. I never believed sales was just smiling over dinner. Good account people could keep a client from walking away long enough for operations to fix the underlying issue. The problem was that Courtney sometimes seemed to believe keeping the conversation positive was the same thing as fixing what made the conversation necessary. The call I regretted came after Bright Path received the first formal corrective plan. It was late enough that I was already home. I had changed into sweatpants, eaten half a bowl of soup, and opened my laptop because I had one document left to review before the next morning. When Courtney's name appeared on my phone, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I thought about the girl I used to pick up after school and answered. Her voice was different from the confident one she used with clients. "I think I'm going to lose this account," she said. I asked whether she had spoken with her operations team. "Yes, they're telling me they can fix it, but no one will tell me what matters most to Westbridge right now." I reminded her that Westbridge had already told them what mattered in the corrective plan. She said, "That thing is 12 pages long. Everything sounds important." I should have ended the call there. Instead, I said, "Read it again. Start with the backlog section." There was a short silence. Then Courtney said, "Okay." Her breathing changed, not dramatically, but enough that I could hear the relief. "So that's the thing." I corrected her immediately. "I didn't say that," I said. "Start with the backlog section because it is already identified as an immediate corrective requirement. I'm not telling you what anyone is discussing internally." She responded, Right, I understand." I told her not to call me privately about Westbridge again. She promised she would not. Then before hanging up, she said, "Thank you." Seriously, when I replayed that conversation months later for compliance, I did not pretend it had been perfectly appropriate simply because the information already existed. Courtney had the corrective plan. Her company had received it through official channels. I had not exposed anything confidential, but I had still responded as her sister ought instead of forcing her to solve the problem through her own account team. The distinction mattered to me. I could defend the content of what I said while still acknowledging that I should not have said it privately. At the time, though, I told myself I had merely pointed her back to her own document. I did not consider what Courtney might learn from the interaction. She had pushed past the boundary, and eventually I had given her something that felt useful. Whether she consciously understood that lesson, then I could not know. I only knew the pattern became easier to recognize later. Bright Path did improve the backlog over the next month, but not enough to erase the broader concerns. Their late delivery rate remained above our target, and some of the corrective steps took longer than promised. By March, Westbridge had to decide whether to force a faster transition or keep Bright Path in place long enough to avoid creating a second operational problem while solving the first. Changing a logistics vendor was not like switching coffee brands in a broad rec room. Routes had to be reassigned. Systems had to connect. Facilities needed notice. Store teams needed new procedures. Contracts had to be reviewed. A rush transition could cost more than a few additional weeks of underperformance, especially during a period when our volume was expected to rise. That was why the review committee chose a short, conditional extension instead of ending the relationship immediately. I was part of the discussion because operational risk was my responsibility. But I was not the only person making the decision. Procurement weighed transition timing. Finance modeled the cost. Contract management reviewed what options existed under the current agreement. My recommendation was simple. Bright Path had not earned a long-term commitment, but forcing a switch before Westbridge was prepared could hurt us more than giving them a limited period to prove they could stabilize performance. "This buys operational stability," I said in the meeting. "It does not promise renewal." The minutes reflected that distinction. Courtney called me after Brightpath received the extension notice. This time she did not ask for confidential information. She was almost cheerful. "You saved me," she said. "I was standing in my kitchen slicing an apple. And I remember stopping with the knife against the cutting board because the sentence irritated me more than it should have." "I protected Westbridge," Courtney laughed. "Same difference." I told her it was not the same difference at all. Westbridge had chosen the option that reduced our own risk. Brightpath happened to benefit because keeping them temporarily was less disruptive than replacing them immediately. Courtney said, "You can tell yourself whatever you want, but if you'd recommended we were done, we'd be done." I said, "And if the numbers had supported ending it immediately, I would have recommended that." Her tone cooled. "You always have to make everything sound brutal." I told her I was making it accurate. Courtney replied, "Fine, accurate. We got more time." I said yes. Then she added, "And I'm going to make sure we use it." That part, at least, I believed. Courtney was ambitious, and I had never mistaken ambition for incompetence. What I underestimated was how quickly she could turn more time into success if the right audience wanted to hear it. A few days later, I was at my parents' house for Sunday lunch when I heard the new version. Mom had made roast chicken and put Courtney in the chair beside her. Even though Courtney had arrived 20 minutes late, Dad was talking about a neighbor's fence when Mom interrupted to tell me Courtney had saved one of the biggest accounts in her regions. Courtney was reaching for a serving spoon. She did not look at me. "Mom, you don't have to make it sound dramatic." The humility in her voice was polished enough that I almost admired it. Mom beamed. "It is dramatic. Your father and I are proud of you." Dad raised his water glass to the family salesperson. Courtney smiled and finally glanced across the table at me. I knew which account Mom meant. The timing made it obvious, but I also knew I was not going to explain a client's performance status over roast chicken just because my sister had allowed our parents to misunderstand it. "Congratulations," I said. Courtney's eyebrows lifted slightly as though she had expected a challenge. Mom looked almost disappointed that I did not argue. "See," she said, "Lauren can be supportive when she wants to be." I cut another piece of chicken and decided silence was still better than turning a confidential business relationship into a family correction session. Looking back, that lunch was one of the moments I used to blame entirely on everyone else. Courtney let Mom praise a distorted story. Mom eagerly accepted it. Dad joined the toast because Dad joined whatever required the least resistance. All of that was true. It was also true that I saw the distortion and chose not to correct anything I safely could correct. I could not disclose performance details, but I could have said, "Mom, you're describing a business situation you don't understand, and I'm not discussing it here." Instead, I offered one word and let the family story settle another layer deeper. I did it because I hated competing. I also did it because I believed the truth existed independently of whether they understood it. At work, that assumption usually held because facts were documented. At home, facts could be replaced by repetition. The strange part was that Courtney still came to me for reality when nobody else was listening. A week after that lunch, she called during business hours and complained that Brightpath's account team thought I was being too rigid about using official channels. I told her I was not being rigid. I was protecting both of us. "You won't even talk to me about Westbridge unless everyone's copied," she said. "That's the point." Courtney sighed. "Do you know how weird that makes things for me?" "People know you're my sister," I said. "Then they should also know being my sister doesn't get you a private version of the client." She muttered something about my making simple things difficult. I told her I was making the rules obvious enough that nobody could misunderstand them later. That sentence would matter more than I knew. At the time, I did not realize Courtney was saying very different things about those boundaries depending on who was listening. To me, she complained that I was too strict. To people inside Brightpath, I would later learn she sometimes used that strictness to prove how professional our relationship was. To Mom, she somehow reduced my role until I was barely more than a person processing paperwork. Each version contained a small piece of truth, which made all of them easier to believe. I did not see the full shape yet. I only saw individual moments that annoyed me. By the end of March, BrightPath had improved enough that the immediate crisis softened, but the account was still fragile. Stores were no longer escalating every week, yet the performance trend did not justify confidence. I continued documenting the numbers. Courtney continued working the relationship. In one meeting, she brought 3 members of her operations team and presented a recovery plan that was better than what they had shown us before. I told them exactly which metrics would determine whether the improvement was real. Courtney smiled and said, "So, if we hit these, we're good." I answered, "If you hit them consistently, you'll have evidence that performance has improved." She tilted her head. "You really hate the phrase 'we're good,' don't you?" I said, "I hate phrases that mean different things to different people." That became the tension between us. Courtney liked language that opened possibilities. I liked language that closed ambiguity. In sales, her instinct often worked. In contracts and operational reviews, mine had to. Neither approach made one of us smarter than the other. The danger came. Then Courtney started treating hopeful language as if it could replace the status underneath it. In early April, I saw the first written sign that she might be doing exactly that. One of BrightPath's routine account communications described Westbridge as retained and moving toward multi-year renewal. I read the line twice. Retained was arguable in the narrowest sense because the conditional extension had kept the account active. Moving toward multi-year renewal was not a status had communicated. We were still evaluating whether BrightPath could meet the corrective requirements. No one on our side had approved a long-term commitment. I forwarded the wording to the appropriate account channel and wrote a correction that was intentionally plain. The current term was a conditional extension. No multi-year renewal had been approved. BrightPath should not represent the account otherwise. I read the message once before sending because Courtney's name was on the thread, then sent it without changing a word. Courtney replied 20 minutes later. "Understood. Thanks for clarifying." If the story had ended there, nothing that followed would have been necessary. BrightPath had the correct status in writing. Courtney had acknowledged it. I had done what I thought I was supposed to do. Then my phone rang. It was Courtney. "You really sent that to everybody?" she asked. "Yes, you could have just called me. That would defeat the purpose," she exhaled sharply. "Lauren, this is what I mean. Sales language is different. Moving toward renewal doesn't mean there's a contract sitting on someone's desk. And conditional extension doesn't mean a long-term commitment is coming. You're being technical. It's a contract status. Technical is the point." Courtney was quiet long enough for me to hear voices in the background on her end. Then she said, "Fine, I got it. But you know we're trending in the right direction. I know your performance will be reviewed against the agreed metrics." She gave a humorless laugh. "Do you practice talking like that?" "No, I practice not promising things I can't promise." We ended the call without yelling. There was no dramatic threat, no confession, and nothing I would have described as a major confrontation at the time. Courtney had pushed the wording. I had corrected it. The record was clear. I believed that should have been enough. A little more than a week later, after another difficult performance review, Courtney sent me a private text. "I know you're the reason. They gave us more time. Thank you." I stared at the message because it captured exactly the confusion I had been trying to eliminate. I could have ignored it. Instead, I replied, "Because I wanted the boundary in writing. The committee gave BrightPath more time because switching now would hurt Westbridge. Don't confuse that with a renewal." Courtney sent back a thumbs-up reaction, nothing more. I saved the conversation automatically with every other message on my phone and moved on with my day. I did not recognize it as important evidence. To me, it was simply another correction I hoped I would never need to make again. By then, I had started noticing something else. Mom had become more specific when she praised Courtney's success. She talked about Courtney saving accounts and keeping clients from walking. She joked that Courtney understood business because she understood people while I understood process. The words were not insulting enough to challenge individually, and they sounded like the kind of simplifications Mom had always made. Still, they seemed oddly aligned with the way Courtney described our work. I noticed it, then I dismissed it. I had more important things to do than investigate the source of my mother's vocabulary. West Burbridge's performance review continued. Bright Paths still had time. Courtney still had a job. And I still believed the line between an extension and a renewal was so obvious that one written correction would prevent anyone from seriously confusing the two. Then, near the end of April, an account communication landed in my inbox that made me sit straighter in my chair. Bright Path described Westbridge as a retained client moving toward multi-year renewal. This time, the language was not buried inside a casual update. It was being used as evidence of Courtney's success. The message that made me sit straighter was not a casual note from Courtney. It came through the regular Bright Path account channel near the end of April. Attached to a leadership update their team had sent to several people on the Westbridge side. Bright Path was announcing some internal role changes, including Courtney's planned move into a regional director position. Most of the language was ordinary corporate praise, strong client relationships, retention performance, revenue growth, leadership potential. Courtney had earned enough legitimate accomplishments that none of that bothered me. Then I reached the paragraph about Westbridge. It described the account as one of the retention successes that had helped demonstrate Courtney's readiness for a larger role, and it referred to Bright Path as having stabilized the relationship and secured long-term retention. I read the paragraph twice, then opened the contract status file beside it. The wording had moved beyond the vague optimism Courtney had used earlier. Bright Path was now tying Westbridge directly to her promotion narrative, and the description still did not match for record. We had extended the existing arrangement for a limited period because forcing a transition immediately would create more operational risk than giving Bright Path time to improve. We had not approved a new long-term commitment. There was no signed multi-year agreement waiting in legal. There was no verbal commitment I knew about. There was no committee decision saying Bright Path had secured anything beyond more time. I forwarded the account update to Karen and the other Westbridge people who needed to see it, then sent a clarification through the same formal channel. I kept the language factual. Westbridge remained under a conditional extension. No multi-year renewal had been approved, and our evaluation of Bright Path's performance was ongoing. I did not mention Courtney's promotion. I did not write, "Your employee is lying." I did not accuse anyone of manipulating a career decision. My responsibility was the client record. So, I corrected the client record. That should have been the end of my involvement. It was not. The reply came first from someone on Bright Path's account leadership team, not Courtney. He thanked us for the clarification and said they would make sure their internal wording accurately reflected the status. A few minutes later, I saw Daniel Mercer's name appear in my inbox. He asked whether I had 20 minutes that afternoon for a call with him and Karen. I accepted because the account status had clearly become more than a routine wording issue. Daniel joined the call exactly on time. Karen was already there with me. His voice was controlled, but I had sat across from him often enough to recognize when he was irritated. "I want to make sure I understand the distinction from West Burbridge's side." He said Bright Path has a short extension of the current arrangement. "Correct." "Yes. No long-term renewal has been approved." "Correct." "Has anyone at West Burbridge given Courtney or anyone else at Bright Path a verbal commitment that the account will remain with us beyond the extension?" "No." Daniel paused. "Any informal assurance that could reasonably be interpreted that way?" I thought carefully before answering. "Not from me, and I'm not aware of one from anyone authorized to make that commitment. Karen added that any long-term renewal would require the normal review process and approvals. Daniel thanked her, then asked one more question. Is the current extension itself evidence that Bright Path is trending toward renewal? That depends on future performance. I said it is evidence that Westbridge decided an immediate switch would create unnecessary operational risk. That is not the same thing as evidence of a future commitment. Daniel exhaled quietly. That is what I needed to confirm. I could have asked him what Courtney had told her leadership. I did not. Brightpath's internal promotion process was not mine to investigate. Still, the question was obvious enough that Karen asked it for me. Daniel, is there a particular reason this distinction is suddenly important on your side? He took a few seconds before answering. Courtney's promotion case is based on a broader body of work. Westbridge is not the only account involved, and it is not the sole reason she was selected, but it has been represented as one of her larger retention successes. I need to make sure the internal record reflects what the client actually confirmed that mattered. If Bright Path had promoted Courtney solely because someone believed a contract existed when it did not, I would have questioned their process almost as much as her judgment. That was not what had happened. Courtney had other wins. Her numbers were good enough to put her in serious consideration. Westbridge was one of the examples that made her story more impressive. It was the kind of account people remembered because it had been difficult, visible, and at risk. Saying she had helped steady the relationship was fair. Saying she had secured long-term retention was not. I've already corrected the status twice. I said once when the extension was first being described as moving toward renewal and again today. I see the first clarification, Daniel said, and I appreciate that. There was something in his tone that told me he had found more than I was seeing, but I did not ask him to share internal Bright Path information. Karen asked whether Westbridge needed to do anything else. Daniel said no. He would handle the wording on his side. After the call ended, Karen stayed on for another minute. You okay? I'm fine. You sound annoyed. I am annoyed because of Courtney because this was already corrected. Karen gave a soft laugh. That sounds more like you. She knew me well enough to understand that the part upsetting me was not the idea that Courtney might receive a promotion. It was the idea that a defined status could be corrected in writing and still reappear later wearing a more flattering name. I had always believed documentation solved that problem. At Westbridge, usually it did. If someone wanted to know what a vendor had agreed to, they opened the contract. If they wanted to know whether a corrective target had been met, they looked at the scorecard. Facts did not become more true because the person describing them was persuasive. Family had trained Courtney in the opposite direction. At home, if she told a story confidently enough, the story often became the event everyone remembered. She could miss half of Dad's birthday dinner because of work and still become the thoughtful daughter because she brought his favorite bourbon. I could spend the morning driving him to an appointment and become the difficult daughter because I told Mom she should have confirmed the insurance referral herself. The facts never disappeared. They simply became less important than the emotional framing around them. I had always treated that as a family problem. I was beginning to see that Courtney did not necessarily stop using the same instinct when she went to work. The next week gave me a more concrete reason to worry. Bright Path's performance had improved in some areas, but not enough in the ones that mattered most. The backlog had come down, then started creeping upward, again at one facility. On-time delivery was better than it had been in February, but still below the threshold West Burbridge wanted for a long-term commitment. A staffing issue caused another wave of delays, and finance updated the cost model for continuing under the current service level. None of the numbers were catastrophic that almost made the decision harder. Bright Path was not failing so spectacularly that everyone could point to one disaster and walk away. They were failing just consistently enough to make confidence expensive. By early May, Our review committee had enough information to make the next recommendation. I went into the meeting with the latest performance trend, the operational consequences of staying, and the transition risk of leaving. Procurement had alternative vendor options. Finance had modeled the cost differences. Contract management had laid out the timing required if we chose not to move into a new multi-year agreement with BrightPath. The room was not dramatic. Nobody pounded a table. Nobody declared BrightPath dead. We went through the numbers. One of our procurement leads asked whether extending BrightPath again would likely produce a different result. Possibly, I said. But at this point, we would be buying more uncertainty, not evidence. Another person asked whether switching immediately would create service disruption. Yes, I said, which is why we should not treat this like an overnight exit. We need a controlled transition option. Karen asked the question that mattered most. Would you recommend a multi-year renewal under the current performance profile? No, I did not hesitate. That was my job. The rest of the committee reached the same basic conclusion. Westbridge was not going to recommend a multi-year renewal under the existing conditions. That did not mean BrightPath disappeared the next morning. We still had contractual steps to follow. We still had to manage continuity. Procurement still needed transition work, but the direction was clear enough to document. The minutes were finalized before Courtney's promotion dinner. That date would matter later. At the time, he simply saved the minutes in the proper place and moved on to the next problem on my calendar. Courtney did not know everything discussed in that meeting. She should not have. BrightPath would receive the appropriate client communication Bornat process through the normal process, but she knew enough to understand the account was still not secure because I had already told her twice that the extension was not a renewal. BrightPath had the formal dacitus. She had acknowledged the correction herself. A few days after the committee meeting, she called me during lunch. Are you coming Friday? She asked. Yes. Mom said you sounded weird about it. Mom thinks anyone who isn't performing excitement is unhappy. Courtney laughed. That's fair. For a moment, she sounded like my sister again instead of an account director attached to a problem I was documenting. Then she said, I really do want you there. I said, I'm coming. I know. I just don't want work to make it strange. I put my fork down. Then don't talk to me about West Burbridge. I wasn't going to. Good. She hesitated. You know the promotion isn't just because of that account, right? That was the first time she had acknowledged the issue directly. I know. I've had a strong year. I know that too. My numbers are good. Courtney, I'm not arguing with your promotion. She went quiet. You make it sound like you don't care. I care. I also have a responsibility to correct inaccurate information about my company. I said I understood the clarification. Then there's nothing to argue about. Courtney sighed. Sometimes talking to you feels like being cross-examined. Then stop calling me about work. She laughed again, but there was tension underneath it. Fine. Friday is family. No Westbridge. Agreed. I believed her enough to end the call without another warning. Later that afternoon, Daniel called. This time, the conversation was shorter and more awkward because the promotion dinner was only a few days away. Karen joined again because I had no interest in creating unnecessary ambiguity about why Daniel and I were speaking. Daniel said BrightPath had reviewed the account representation internally. He did not give me confidential details about Courtney's promotion file, and I did not ask for them. What he did say was that there was enough inconsistency between Courtney's descriptions and West Burbridge's confirmed status that he needed to address it with her. When Karen asked Monday morning, he said, the dinner has already been organized, families are invited, and I don't see a benefit in turning a recognition event into a disciplinary scene when I can address the record first thing Monday. That sounded reasonable to me. Then Daniel added, there is one exception. If she repeats the long-term renewal claim in front of leadership Friday night after the client has corrected it, I won't wait until Monday. I looked at Karen's face on the screen. She gave no reaction beyond a slight nod. That's your call, she said. Daniel turned back to me. Lauren, I'm telling you this because if anything involving Westbridge comes up at the event, I don't want you feeling responsible for correcting her in the room. You don't need to. I wasn't planning to. I know. There was no conspiracy between us, no secret plan, no revenge arrangement. Daniel had an employee whose description of a client relationship no longer matched what the client said. He intended to deal with it. The only reason the timing involved me at all was that Courtney was my sister and I would be sitting in the same room. When the call ended, I remember thinking the matter had finally reached the point where it no longer belonged to me. Westbridge had made its recommendation. The record was corrected. Daniel knew Brightpath could decide what that meant for Courtney. I went back to work. That evening, Mom called while I was grocery shopping. "What are you wearing Friday?" she asked. "A navy dress. Not black." "No." "Good. Black can look resentful." I stopped beside a display of tomatoes. "Mom, colors don't have motives. You know what I mean?" "I really don't." She lowered her voice as if she were telling me something sensitive. "Courtney has worked very hard for this. I just want everything to be nice. So do I. She's been under a lot of pressure lately, I'm sure. And I know your work has been stressful too, but Friday should be about her." I felt a familiar irritation rise, but I kept my voice level. "I have not asked for Friday to be about me." "I'm not saying you have. I'm saying, sometimes you get that look." "What look?" "That serious look where everyone knows you disapprove." I almost laughed. "You mean my face?" "You know exactly what I mean." I did. Unfortunately, Mom had always treated my lack of enthusiasm as aggression. Courtney could dominate a room and be charismatic. Mom could insult someone and be honest. Dad could withdraw and be peaceful. If I became quiet, I was making a statement. "I'm coming," I said. "I'll congratulate Courtney. I'll eat dinner. I'll go home. That is the entire plan." Mom relaxed slightly. "Good. That's all I want." As I pushed my cart toward the next aisle, she added, "And please don't start correcting Courtney about business in front of people. She's the one being promoted. Let her enjoy it." I stopped walking. "What makes you think I would do that?" Mom hesitated. She mentioned, "You've been very particular about some account language lately." There it was. Courtney had been discussing the Westbridge issue with Mom. I chose my next words carefully. "Did Courtney tell you which account?" "No. She just said you were getting technical about something and making it more complicated than it needed to be." I stared at the shelves in front of me without seeing them. "Mom, if Courtney discusses one of my company's vendor relationships with you, don't assume you're getting enough information to judge it." Mom made a dismissive sound. "I'm not judging anything. I'm saying you two have different strengths. Courtney understands relationships. You understand rules. That's not what this is about." "Well, whatever it's about, Friday isn't the time." I had no interest in explaining confidential business context in the produce section of a grocery store, so I let the conversation end. But afterward, I replayed one sentence. She said, "You were getting technical." That phrase came directly from Courtney. I had heard her use it after I corrected the renewal language. For the first time, I wondered how many of Mom's opinions about my work were actually recycled versions of things Courtney had told her. I still did not jump to the conclusion that Courtney had spent years deliberately turning my parents against me. I did not have evidence for that. Families repeat each other's language all the time. Mom loved simple categories, and Courtney was good at giving her simple categories. That was all I knew. But I noticed by Thursday afternoon, the Westbridge matter was quiet on my side. The committee recommendation had been documented. Transition planning had begun at a level that did not require Courtney to be involved yet. No one had asked me to communicate anything directly to her. I intended to attend Friday's dinner as her sister and leave business outside the room. Then Mom texted me, "Friday is Courtney's big night. Please don't bring your work mood with you." I read the message once and almost put my phone away. Then another message arrived. "She finally has something the whole family can be proud of. Don't make her feel like she has to defend it." I did not answer immediately. The part that bothered me was not Mom believing Courtney deserves celebration. She did. It was the implication that Courtney's success required protection from my existence. I typed, deleted, then typed again. I'm not bringing anything to that dinner except myself. Mom reacted with a heart. I looked at the little symbol and shook my head. At the time, I thought Friday's biggest challenge would be getting through one evening without Mom turning Courtney's promotion into another comparison. I was wrong. The professional problem had already been documented. The family problem had been building for years. Friday night was simply the first time Courtney tried to use both versions of the story in the same room. By Saturday morning, the part of the story my family understood was simple. Mom had insulted me at Courtney's promotion dinner. I had texted Courtney's boss, and within minutes he had pulled her out of the room. From where they stood, the timing looked terrible. I understood that before anyone said it out loud. What they did not understand was that Daniel had not taken Courtney into the hallway to fire her, strip away her promotion, or punish her because I was angry. From what he was later allowed to tell me, he had done exactly what he told Karen and me he would do if Courtney repeated the Westbridge claim in front of leadership. He told her there was a discrepancy between how she had represented the account and how the client had formally described it, and that implementation of her promotion would be paused until Brightpath clarified the record. That was all. No scene, no termination, no pubic accusation. The humiliation my family remembered was the one Mom had created. Everything Daniel did happened quietly. Courtney did not describe it that way when she called the next morning. "He put my promotion on hold," she said as soon as I answered. Her voice was tight, controlled in the way it became when she was furious but still, trying to sound reasonable. "Do you understand what that means?" I was standing at my kitchen counter pouring coffee. "It means Brightpath wants to clarify something before moving forward." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk like this is some neutral corporate process you had nothing to do with." I set the coffee pot down. "The account issue existed before dinner." Courtney laughed once. "The account issue existed, but he was going to talk to me Monday. You made him do it Friday." I did not deny that my message had changed the timing. "He told us he would address it Friday if you repeated the long-term renewal claim in front of leadership. You did because we retained the account temporarily." "There you go again." Her voice rose. "Do you hear yourself? You always have to take whatever I accomplish and reduce it until it sounds pathetic." That accusation was so familiar I almost answered it automatically. I almost told her that I had congratulated her before the dinner, that I had acknowledged her other numbers were strong, that I had never argued she did not deserve professional success. Then I stopped. Courtney had spent years turning every boundary into a referendum on whether I supported her enough. I was not going to have that conversation while she was also asking me to discuss a client relationship through a private family call. "I'm not debating West Burbridge with you," I said. "Not here." Courtney was silent for a second, "because you know what you did looked bad." "The timing looks bad," I said. "That is not the same thing. Mom embarrassed you." Dad laughed. "And then you texted my boss." "Yes. And you expect people to believe those things are unrelated?" "I expect anyone reviewing it to look at what existed before the toast." She seized on one word, "reviewing it." I heard movement on her end as if she had started pacing. "You think there's going to be a review? I think if you're accusing me of using my job to retaliate against you, there should be." She went quiet again. I knew Courtney well enough to recognize the moment she was changing strategies. When she spoke next, her voice was softer. "Lauren, I don't want to do that." "Then don't. I'm trying to give you a chance to fix this before it becomes something bigger." "Fix what?" "Call Daniel. Tell him last night got personal. Tell him the Westbridge stuff can wait until Monday like he originally planned." I felt something inside me become very still. "No," she inhaled sharply. "Why not?" "Because the account status is not personal, and I am not calling your boss to interfere with whatever Brightpath decides to do. You already interfered. Then, file whatever you think's happened accurately." "You really want me to do that?" "If you believe I violated a professional boundary, yes." Courtney's tone hardened. You're going to regret saying that. I took my coffee and walked toward my desk, then put that in the complaint too. Mom called less than an hour later, which told me Courtney had already started building the family version. Mom did not ask whether I was okay after the dinner. She did not mention what she had said about me. She opened with, "Your sister is devastated." I sat down in front of my laptop. I'm sure she is. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for her boss to pull her aside in the middle of her celebration? I looked at the blank chronology document on my screen. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for my mother to call me useless in front of her coworkers? Mom let out the particular sigh she used when she thought I was being difficult on purpose. That was a joke. It wasn't funny. You know, I didn't mean it literally. Then what did you mean? She hesitated. I meant Courtney was the one being celebrated. You could have let her have that. I almost laughed. Mom, I did let her have it. I attended. I congratulated her. I sat through dinner. I did not say a single negative thing about her promotion. Then why did you text Daniel? Because Courtney had repeated a client claim she had already been formally told was inaccurate. Because Daniel had told me hours earlier what he would do if she repeated it. Because West Burbridge had already documented the account status before Mom ever raised a champagne glass. I could have said all of that, but most of it was not information Mom was entitled to have. You're asking me to discuss a business issue involving my employer and Courtney's employer. I said, I'm not doing that. That is such a convenient answer. It's the same answer I would give if she weren't my sister. No, it isn't. You would never have texted someone's boss like that if it weren't Courtney. You don't know who I communicate with for work. I know what I saw. Then Dad's voice appeared in the background. Put it on speaker. Mom did. Dad came on sounding tired rather than angry. Lauren, nobody's saying your mother should have made that joke. Mom immediately protested. Robert, it was harmless. But Dad talked over her. I'm saying the sequence looked bad. Your mother said something. You got upset. You texted the man. He stood up immediately and pulled Courtney aside. That's what everyone at the table saw. It was probably the clearest description of the problem anyone in my family had given me. It was also incomplete. You're right, I said. Dad sounded relieved. Okay, good. Then call him Monday and explain. I said the timing looked bad. I didn't say your conclusion was right. Dad exhaled. Why do you always have to make this so difficult? I looked at the planner on my desk at the line where his follow-up appointment was still written because I had added it weeks earlier. Because this is my job, Dad, not a disagreement over seating at Thanksgiving. It didn't look like work when you did it. That's because you don't know what happened before dinner. Then tell us. I can't. Mom jumped in immediately. Exactly. We're supposed to believe there's some big secret business reason you can't explain while Courtney's the one suffering. You don't have to believe me, I said. Bright Path and West Burbridge have records. If somebody wants to review what happened, they can. That answer made Mom angrier than if I had shouted. You always do this, she said. You retreat into rules whenever you don't want to admit you hurt someone. I stared at the screen and thought about how close she had come to saying something true for the wrong reason. I did retreat into systems. I trusted records because records did not reward whoever cried first. But I had also learned that using Graljol as a shield could become its own kind of avoidance. The February call was proof of that. I had told myself I kept family and work separate because the official documents existed even after I had allowed one private exception. That did not make Courtney's accusation true, but it did mean I could not pretend the boundary had always been flawless. Mom was still talking. Courtney says you've been resentful about this promotion for weeks. Did she? Yes. What did I say that sounded resentful? Mom paused. She said you kept correcting her about some account. Correcting an inaccurate client status is my job. See, you're doing it again. I did not answer. Mom continued, this is exactly what she means. You make everything sound like she's careless, and you're the only competent person in the room. The wording caught my attention because I had heard its shape before. Courtney had accused me of making her achievement sound smaller. Now, Mom was repeating the idea with almost no variation. I filed that away. Mentally, not because I had evidence of some campaign, but because I had started paying attention to phrases that moved through my family as if nobody remembered who said them first. Dad tried to bring the conversation back to the point. Can we just agree nobody files anything or calls anyone until Monday? I looked at my phone. You need to ask Courtney that. Mom said, why? Because she's the one threatening to file a complaint. Silence, Dad asked. A complaint about what? About me using my position to retaliate against her. Mom's response came fast. Well, if that's what happened. Linda, Dad said sharply enough to surprise me. Mom stopped. Dad asked me, did you? No. Then why would Courtney say that? I could have answered, because she needed another explanation for what happened. Instead, I said, ask her. The call ended without resolution. That was typical for my family. We rarely solved arguments. We exhausted them until somebody needed to make dinner or leave for an appointment, then resumed normal life without agreement. Usually, I participated in that reset because continuing conflict felt inefficient. This time, I did not have that luxury. If Courtney moved the family story into a professional channel, the record mattered more than whether Mom eventually stopped being angry. By Monday morning, she had. Karen messaged me before 9 and asked me to join a call with Westbridge Compliance. The person leading it was a woman named Melissa Grant, whom I knew only from annual training sessions and a few internal policy updates. Her tone was calm enough to make the situation feel more serious, not less. She explained that BrightPath had notified Westbridge of a conflict allegation raised by one of its employees. Because the allegation involved a disclosed family relationship and a client-facing decision, Westbridge would review my conduct independently, rather than rely on Brett's conclusions. This is not a finding. Melissa said, it is a review. We need to determine whether there was retaliation, inappropriate disclosure, or influence outside your authorized role. I appreciated the precision, even though hearing those words attached to my name made my stomach tighten. Understood. Melissa continued, effective immediately. While we review, you'll be recused from BrightPath-related recommendations and communications. Except where compliance specifically requests information, Karen will reassign the operational contact temporarily. I had expected something like that, but expectation did not make it pleasant. BrightPath was one vendor among several I managed, and the temporary recusal did not threaten my title or salary. Still, being told to step away from work, I had managed carefully because my sister had accused me of retaliation, felt like having someone place a transparent wall around part of my professional identity. I could still see everything I had done. I simply could not touch it until other people decided whether they trusted the way I had done it. I understand, I said. Again, Melissa asked me to walk through Friday night from the moment I arrived at the dinner. I did. I told her about the formal remarks, Mom's toast, Courtney's statement about fighting for the Westbridge renewal, my message to Daniel, and his decision to speak with her privately. I did not minimize the insult. I also did not make it the center of the explanation. Were you angry when you texted him? Melissa asked. Yes. Karen looked at me, but I kept going. Were you angry at Courtney? Yes, partly. Did that anger influence your decision to send the message? I thought before answering because I did not want to hide behind wording. It influenced the fact that I was no longer interested in helping preserve the social delay until Monday. It did not create the underlying account issue or Daniel's reason to address it. Daniel had told Karen and me before the dinner that if Courtney repeated the long-term renewal claim in front of leadership, he would address it then, rather than wait. Melissa wrote something. So your position is that the message changed timing, not the substantive concern? Yes. Would you have sent the same message if your mother had not insulted you? That was harder. I don't know, I said. Karen shifted slightly but did not interrupt. Melissa looked up. Explain. If Courtney had repeated the claim without the family part happening, Daniel still had already told us he would address it if he heard it again. He did not need my permission. I might have left it to him without texting. The insult made me unwilling to participate in protecting the evening from a conversation Courtney had already earned. I'm not going to pretend that emotion had nothing to do with sending 4 words, but the professional issue existed first. Melissa nodded slowly. That distinction is exactly why we're reviewing the chronology. It was not comfortable, but I preferred the question to anyone pretending my anger did not matter. I had been angry. Intelligent people do not become immune to emotion because they know how to document a meeting. The question was whether I had used professional authority to manufacture harm that would not otherwise have existed. I had not. If the review concluded that sending the text was still poor judgment, I could live with that. What I would not do was reshape my memory to make myself look perfectly detached. The complaint package itself came up later in the call. Melissa summarized the allegation rather than handing me every Bright Path document. Courtney claimed that I had a history of using my role at West Burbridge to pressure her account, that my behavior had become increasingly hostile as her promotion approached, and that after our mother embarrassed me at the dinner, I contacted Daniel in retaliation. She also claimed that I had communicated with her privately about Westbridge enough times to create an improper personal channel between client and vendor. The last part was the one that mattered. How many private contacts are being alleged? I asked. Melissa looked at her notes. The complaint does not give a precise number. It characterizes the communication as recurring. My jaw tightened. It wasn't recurring. That's what we need to establish. I expect you'll have the opportunity. Then Melissa mentioned there was a witness statement attached by Courtney describing the sequence at the dinner. The witness was Robert Keene, my father. I did not say anything for several seconds. Melissa must have seen my expression. We can summarize the relevant portion. Please. Dad had written that Linda made a joke comparing the sisters. He said I appeared upset. He saw me use my phone immediately afterward. Within moments, Daniel Mercer stood and asked Courtney to speak privately. Dad said he believed the timing was connected because there had been no visible problem before Mom's comment. Every sentence was technically true. That was what made it hurt. Dad had not claimed, I screamed. He had not invented threats. He had not said he heard me tell Daniel to punish Courtney. He had simply described exactly what he saw while omitting what he did not understand. To him, Courtney's comment about Westbridge had sounded like ordinary business. Boasting. He did not know Daniel and I had spoken earlier that day. He did not know Westbridge had already corrected the account status, but he had still been willing to put his interpretation in writing for Courtney without asking me a single question first. Did he say I threatened anyone? I asked. No. Did he say he knew the content of my message? No. Did he say he understood the Westbridge issue? No. Melissa's voice remained neutral. His statement is relevant to visible timing, not to the underlying business issue. I understand, and I did. Professionally, the statement was weaker than Courtney probably hoped. Emotionally, it landed harder than anything Mom had said at the dinner. For most of my life, I had divided my parents into simple categories. Mom was the one who created the comparisons. Dad was the one who hated conflict. Mom pushed. Dad retreated. Mom said the cruel thing. Dad laughed because he wanted the room to move on. I had often defended him to myself by calling him passive. Reading his statement forced me to consider that passivity was still a choice when it consistently protected the person causing the harm. Karen checked on me after Melissa moved to another question. Lauren, I'm fine. Melissa gave me a moment anyway. Then she asked about direct communication with Courtney concerning Bright Path. I could have started by explaining why the February call did not contain confidential information. Instead, I answered the question first. There was one off-channel conversation in February that I consider relevant. One phone call where she asked me about the account after receiving the corrective action plan. There were also a few private texts later where I explicitly corrected her characterization of the action. I can provide those. What happened in the phone call? I told her Courtney had called while I was home. She asked what mattered most to Westbridge. I refused to share internal discussions. She said the corrective plan made everything sound urgent. I told her to read the plan again and start with the backlog section. Melissa asked, was the backlog requirement already in the corrective plan BrightPath had received? Yes. Did you tell her why it was more important internally than other items? No. Did you communicate anything not already provided to BrightPath? Not. That I'm aware of. Why did you take the call? That question was not about policy. It was about judgment. Because she sounded scared and she's my sister. There was no point making it prettier. Melissa asked, did you understand at the time that giving even non-confidential guidance privately could create the appearance of preferential access? I should have. Did you? I looked at the chronology on my desk. Not enough. That was the answer I had resisted when I first replayed the call. It would have been easy to say the information was public to BrightPath. Therefore, nothing improper happened. But the problem was not just information. The problem was access. Courtney had reached past the formal account process and gotten me to respond as a sister. Even if all I did was point at a paragraph she already had, I had rewarded the attempt. I told her during the call not to contact me privately about Westbridge again. I added after that, when she did call about account issues, I reinforced that we needed to use official channels. I also have messages where I corrected her directly. Melissa asked me to provide only communications relevant to BrightPath and Westbridge. We don't want family conversations unrelated to the account. She said if a thread mixes both, you can flag that and we'll work with you on scope. That was more reasonable than the version Mom would later tell people where my employer supposedly demanded access to my entire phone. Nobody wanted my birthday arguments with Courtney. They wanted evidence connected to the allegation. When the call ended, Karen stayed online. You handled that well, she said. I admitted I made a boundary mistake. That is part of handling it well. I hate that sentence. I know. I leaned back in my chair. Am I off BrightPath until this is done? Yes. How long? I don't know. That answer bothered me more than I wanted it to. I was used to problems with due dates. Give me a failed metric and I could build a corrective path. Give me a decision deadline and I could prepare. Internal reviews moved at the speed required by the evidence and the people involved. There was no neat box on my planner labeled Family Accusation Resolved. Karen said, for what it's worth, your disclosure record is exactly why we have something clean to evaluate. I know, and the committee decision predates Friday. I know. You sound like you're trying to punish yourself before compliance decides whether anyone else should. I looked at her through the screen. I'm trying to find the part Courtney can use. Those are not the same thing. She was right, but I was not ready to admit how much the complaint had gotten under my skin. Courtney's entire strength was framing. She did not need every fact to support her. She needed enough facts arranged in the right order. Mom's insult, my anger, my text, Daniel's standing. One private February call, a few messages. If you removed everything before and between those things, you could tell a convincing story. That was exactly what scared me. I spent the rest of Monday pulling together relevant communications. I exported the private text that mentioned BrightPath or West Burbridge and marked the dates against official documents. The February call itself had no recording. I had never recorded Courtney, and I was glad I had not built my life around secretly collecting people's voices. What I did have was the corrective plan sent before that call, showing the backlog requirement in writing. I had the later message where Courtney thanked me for being the reason. BrightPath got more time and my reply, correcting her assumption. I had the official email stating the extension was not a renewal. I had calendar entries for formal reviews. None of it was exciting evidence. It was ordinary, dated, boring material. Boring material is often what survives. Tuesday morning, Mom texted me, asking whether I had heard from Courtney. I did not respond immediately. 10 minutes later, she sent another message. She barely slept. Then, I hope you're happy. I put my phone face down and continued reviewing an unrelated Venvunder report. 20 minutes after that, Dad called. I let it ring once before answering. Hey, he said. Hi. He sounded uncomfortable. Courtney asked me to write down what I saw Friday. I know there was a pause. How? Compliance summarized the complaint. Dad inhaled. Lauren, I didn't accuse you of anything. You wrote that you believed the timing was connected. Well, it was connected. You texted right after your mother said that. You didn't ask what happened before. I didn't know. Thought there was something before. That didn't stop you from putting your conclusion in writing. I just described what I saw. No, you described what you saw and then added what you thought it meant. Dad's voice tightened. Courtney was upset. She asked me to help explain the sequence and you did. Would you rather I lie? The question irritated me because it offered two options that did not exist. I would rather you say what you actually know and stop where your knowledge ends. That's what I did. No, you knew I texted someone. You knew he stood up. You did not know why. You still wrote that you believed the two things were connected because Mom upset me. Dad was silent. I continued. I'm not asking you to retract what you saw. I'm asking why it never occurred to you to call me before helping Courtney build a complaint about my job. That's not what I thought I was doing. What did you think you were doing? Helping my daughter? The answer came so naturally that I almost missed it. You have to. Dad went quiet again. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. That's not fair. I stared at the wall across from my desk. No, it isn't. I ended the call before either of us could turn it into a larger fight. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of keeping my voice level. Dad's statement was not going to destroy my career. I knew that intellectually. What it destroyed was one of the excuses I had been making for him. He was not always simply trapped between Mom and me. Sometimes he acted. He just preferred actions that reduced conflict for himself. Later that afternoon, Melissa contacted me with a follow-up question. She asked whether Courtney had ever directly told me she considered the West Bridge extension equivalent to a renewal. I forwarded the text where I had told her not to confuse the two and the earlier official email. Melissa acknowledged receipt. She did not say whether that helped me. I returned to my work. By Wednesday, being recused from Bright Path had become strangely visible in my own routine. A calendar invitation arrived for a meeting I normally would have attended, then disappeared when Karen reassigned it. An operations analyst sent a question about Bright Path and quickly followed with, "Sorry, Karen said she's covering this during review." Nobody treated me like a criminal. Nobody whispered when I entered a call. Still, I felt the absence every time someone else handled something that had been mine. That discomfort taught me something I did not enjoy learning. I had always told myself my family's opinion of my career did not matter because I knew what I was capable of. That was mostly true, but competence had become more than a skill to me. It was armor. I had built a private identity around being the person who did things correctly. Mom could call Courtney charismatic. Dad could laugh at her jokes. Courtney could receive the parties. I had the certainty that when rules and consequences became real, I knew how to handle them. Now I was sitting inside a compliance review because I had made one. Judgment call I would not make again. That did not make Courtney right. It did make me human. Thursday morning, Melissa scheduled another interview for the following week and sent a list of topics. One item stood out: alleged verbal assurance regarding account safety. I called Karen. What verbal assurance? I don't know yet. From me? That's what Brightpath is trying to clarify. I felt cold despite the warm room. I never told Courtney the account was safe. I know what you've told us. Compliance is asking because Brightpath says that language appeared in their internal account reporting. Who's reporting? Karen hesitated. Lauren, I don't want to give you something secondhand and have you treat it as established. Melissa will walk you through what's relevant. That was fair. It was also frustrating. Okay. After we hung up, I opened the February corrective plan again. Backlog, staffing, delivery, performance, escalation. Cadence. Nothing in the document said the account was safe. Nothing in my messages said the account was safe. My private conversation had pointed Courtney toward a requirement she already possessed. Somewhere between that and BrightPath's internal record, something had changed. Mom called around noon. I almost ignored it, but I answered because Dad had another appointment scheduled the next week, and a ridiculous part of my brain assumed she might need actual information. She did. Do you know whether your father needs to bring his insurance card again if they already scanned it last time? I stared at my phone. I don't know. You always know. Call the office. There was a pause. Lauren, I'm asking you and I'm telling you the office can answer. What is wrong with you lately? The question was so astonishing that I laughed before I could stop myself. Mom sounded offended. What's funny? You called me useless in front of a room full of people less than a week ago. And now you're irritated because I won't manage Dad's appointment for you. I said I was joking, and I'm saying call the office. You're punishing us now. No, it feels like it. Having to handle your own question is not punishment. Mom was silent for several seconds. Courtney was right. You've changed. I looked at the planner on my desk. Dad's appointment was written there along with the office number. I could have answered Mom in less than a minute. The old version of me would have then spent the next hour resenting the fact that she asked. I hope so, I said. I ended the call and left the planner open. The review still frightened me. Courtney still had enough pieces to create a story that looked ugly from certain angles. But something else was happening alongside it. For the first time, I was being forced to distinguish between responsibility and reflex. My job required me to cooperate with compliance. It did not require me to manage my mother's inconvenience. My mistake with Courtney had come from exactly that same instinct. Someone I cared about sounded overwhelmed, so I stepped in just enough to make the postum easier. Then I told myself the intervention was too small to matter. That pattern was beginning to look less harmless. Friday afternoon, Melissa called with one final request before the weekend. BrightPath had identified several references in Courtney's internal account reporting to a verbal signal that Westbridge intended to remain with BrightPath if corrective performance continued. Because the allegation involved me, Melissa needed to know whether I had ever communicated anything that Courtney could reasonably interpret that way. No, I said. Think carefully. I am. Did you ever tell her that if they cleared the backlog, the account would renew? No. Did you tell her that Westbridge wanted to stay? No. Did you tell her leadership was comfortable with the relationship? No. What did you tell her? I opened the notes from February. I told her I would not discuss internal decisions. I told her to read the corrective plan. I told her to start with the backlog section because the requirement was already there. Later, when she thanked me for getting BrightPath more time, I specifically told her the committee extended the relationship because switching immediately would hurt Westbridge and that she should not confuse it with renewal. Melissa asked me to resend that message thread along with the date of the corrective plan. I did. Then she asked the question that stayed with me all weekend. If you never told her the account was safe, where did that language come from? I looked at Courtney's text on my screen. I know you're the reason they gave us more time. Thank you. Then my reply, the committee gave BrightPath more time because switching now would hurt Westbridge. Don't confuse that with a renewal. I don't know, I said. And for the first time since the promotion dinner, I stopped wondering whether Courtney could make my mistake look worse than it was. I started wondering how much of her own story she had already built around words I had never said. That question followed me into the weekend. If I had never told Courtney the account was safe, where had BrightPath gotten the idea that I had? I knew better than to start inventing answers. That was exactly the kind of mistake I spent my professional life warning people against. When facts were incomplete, most people rushed to fill the blank with whatever explanation felt most satisfying. I did the opposite. I opened a fresh document, wrote the word chronology at the top, and started again from the beginning. I had already given compliance a timeline, but this one was for me. I listed the date Courtney became BrightPath's lead contact on the Westbridge account, the date I disclosed our relationship, the dates of the first performance decline, the corrective plan, the February call, the conditional extension, my written correction about renewal language, the committee meeting, the promotion material, Daniel's call, the dinner, and Courtney's complaint. Beside each event, I wrote what existed before it and what changed after it. No theories, no judgments, just sequence. The exercise calmed me because sequence had always been harder to manipulate than emotion. My disclosure came before Courtney had any reason to claim I was targeting her. The corrective action plan came before our private call. BrightPath had the backlog requirement before I mentioned it. The conditional extension was approved by a committee before Courtney thanked me privately. My written correction that the extension was not a renewal came before the Prosushundendermasan. Westbridge's recommendation against a multi-year renewal came before Mom's toast. Daniel's concern about Courtney's wording came before I sent him 4 words. By the time I reached Friday night, the story Courtney was telling required the entire previous 4 months to disappear. That did not mean I had done everything perfectly. I kept circling back to the February call because it was the one place where I had made a choice I would not make again. Courtney had asked for more than the formal process gave her, and I had given her a nudge. It had not contained confidential information, but it had contained something else. Access. I had let being her sister soften a boundary I had put in writing that bothered me more than I expected. For years, I had told myself that I resented being the person everyone relied on. That was only partly true. I resented being taken for granted. I resented being treated as if my competence existed for other people's convenience. But there was also a part of me that liked being the one they needed when the easy answers stopped working. Courtney could charm Mom. She could make Dad laugh. She could walk into a room and leave with 3 new contacts and a dinner invitation. I had built a different kind of pride around being the person who could solve the problem after the room emptied. There was satisfaction in that. I did not like admitting it. The February call had appealed to exactly that part of me. Courtney had sounded frightened. For a few minutes, the polished account director disappeared, and my younger sister was asking me what to do. I had not wanted her fired. I had not wanted BrightPath to fail. I had wanted the problem fixed, and I had known where she should look first. So I told her, not enough to compromise Westbridge, enough to compromise the clean boundary I had claimed existed. That distinction mattered because I did not want to make the same mistake Courtney was making. I was not going to turn a flaw into innocence just because admitting it felt inconvenient. On Monday morning, Melissa asked me to come into a conference room at Westbridge headquarters instead of joining by video. Karen was already there when I arrived. On the table were copies of the relevant documents I had submitted, each labeled by date. Seeing months of ordinary work compressed into a stack of paper gave the situation a strange weight. Nothing on that table looked dramatic. No secret recordings, no hidden contracts, just emails, scorecards, meeting minutes, account notes, and message. Melissa started with the February call. We've confirmed the corrective plan was delivered to BrightPath before your conversation with Courtney. She said the backlog section was already identified as a priority. Yes, we've also confirmed you were not the author of that requirement alone. No, it came from the account review. She looked down at her notes. Do you still believe telling her to focus on that section was appropriate? No. Karen glanced at me. Melissa looked up. Why not? Because she contacted me privately as my sister instead of using the account channel. And I answered, the information wasn't confidential, but responding taught her the private route. Might still get her something useful. Melissa was quiet for a moment. That's a fairly specific answer. I've had time to think about it. Did you understand that at the time? Not fully. What did you think you were doing? helping her read a document her company already had. And now I think I should have told her to call her own operations team. Melissa nodded and made a note. The admission was uncomfortable, but it also removed one of Courtney's biggest advantages. She could not expose a fact I was already willing to state accurately. Melissa moved on to the conditional extension. Who made the decision? The review committee. Were you the final authority? No. Did your recommendation matter? Yes. Would BrightPath likely have received the extension if you had recommended immediate termination? I took a breath. My recommendation would have influenced the discussion, but the decision still belonged to the committee. More importantly, I did not recommend extension because of Courtney. I recommended it because an immediate vendor transition would have created operational risk for Westbridge. Melissa slid a copy of the meeting minutes toward me. That's consistent with the record. I looked at the page. The words I had used in March were there almost exactly as I remembered them. Transition risk, operational continuity, no implication of long-term commitment. Melissa tapped another document. This is also dated before the dinner. It was the later committee record showing that Westbridge would not recommend a multi-year renewal under BrightPath's current performance profile. Yes, and the promotion dinner was after this. Yes, Karen added several days after Melissa marked another note that is significant. She did not say it cleared me. Compliance people rarely gave reassurance before a review was complete, but I understood what she meant. If the professional direction existed before Mom called me useless, then Courtney's claim that I created the business consequence because of the insult became much harder to sustain. Melissa turned next to the message I had. Sent Daniel. Do it tonight? Yes. Do you regret sending it? I had expected the question. I regret that it gave Courtney an easy story to tell. That's not what I asked. No. I don't regret telling Daniel not to delay after she repeated the claim in front of leadership, even knowing how it looked. Yes. Melissa studied me for a second. Why? Because Daniel had already told Karen and me that if Courtney repeated the long-term renewal claim that night, he would address it. She repeated it. He was already responsible for deciding what to do. My message did not give him authority he didn't have, but your mother's insult affected your decision to send it. Yes. Karen shifted slightly again. I kept my voice steady. I was angry. I stopped caring whether Courtney got to have a completely protected evening before facing a conversation that was already coming. If you want to call that personal judgment, I won't argue, but the underlying issue was not personal. Melissa looked at Karen. Does that match your recollection of the earlier Daniel call? Karen nodded. Yes. Daniel said he intended to wait until Monday unless Courtney repeated the claim in front of leadership. He said he would address it immediately if that happened. Melissa made another note. Then she moved to the part that had been bothering me all weekend. BrightPath has told us Courtney's internal account reporting included references to a verbal signal that Westbridge intended to remain with them if corrective performance continued. I never gave her that signal. We're trying to determine whether she could reasonably have inferred it from something you said. I sat straighter. Show me what she says. I said. Melissa shook her head. We don't have a verbatim quote attributed to you. What BrightPath shared with us is the substance of how the relationship was described internally. They are conducting their own review, so this isn't based on a recording or a message from me. No. Then, no. I did not tell her the account was safe. Melissa pulled .dup, the relevant private message thread I had already provided. Courtney, I know you're the reason they gave us more time. Thank you. My reply. The committee gave BrightPath more time because switching now would hurt Westbridge. Don't confuse that with a renewal. Melissa read it aloud. Does this represent your position at the time? Yes. Did you communicate anything different verbally? No. Did you tell her that hitting the corrective metrics guaranteed renewal? No. Did you tell her Westbridge preferred to stay with BrightPath? No. Did you say leadership was comfortable? No. Did anyone else at Westbridge have authority to give her that assurance privately? Not that I know of. Melissa leaned back. Then the phrase verbal signal is something Bright Path will have to trace on their side. For the first time since the complaint began, I felt the balance shift. Not because Courtney was suddenly proven dishonest. Because the question had moved away from whether I had given her permission and toward why she had light-poured having it. That was a much better question. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. Melissa checked the original conflict disclosure and confirmed something I had almost forgotten because it had seemed so routine at the time. My manager and compliance had explicitly approved the structure under which I could continue handling operational performance while other people retained authority over commercial decisions. That mattered because Courtney's complaint suggested I had quietly placed myself in a position to control her account. I had not. The boundaries had been documented from the beginning. Pricing was outside my authority. Commercial negotiations were outside my authority. Final renewal approval was outside my authority. I could influence the operational recommendation because that was my job. But I could not wake up angry at my sister and cancel Bright Path's contract before lunch. The clearer that became on paper, the more absurd parts of Courtney's complaint looked. The difficult part was that not all of it looked absurd. The timing was real. My anger was real. The February call was real. That was why I had to keep resisting the temptation to reduce the story to good sister and bad sister. I wanted to win the review, but I wanted to win it because the facts supported me, not because I had convinced myself I had never made a mistake. After the meeting, Karen and I walked back toward the elevators. "You all right?" she asked. "Yes. You say that every time something is obviously bothering you. I'm still employed." That's a low bar. I pressed the elevator button. "Do you think compliance believes her?" Karen folded her arms. "I think compliance believes documents. That's why I like compliance." She smiled. "I know." The elevator doors opened. Before stepping inside, she said, "For what it's worth, I don't think your February call is the disaster you think it is. I don't think it's a disaster. You're treating it like a moral failure. I'm treating it like a bog habit showing up in the wrong place." Karen looked at me. "What habit?" "Fixing things people should fix themselves." She gave me a longer look than I wanted. "That sounds less like a Bright Path problem." "It isn't." The elevator doors closed before she could say anything else. That afternoon, as if the universe wanted to underline the point, Mom called while I was reviewing a completely unrelated facilities vendor. I let it ring twice before answering. "Did Dad confirm his cardiology appointment?" she asked. "I don't know. You put it in your planner." "I probably did. Can you check?" I looked across my desk. The planner was open. Dad's appointment was written in blue ink on Wednesday at 10:30. I knew the answer without even needing to turn a page. Old reflex would have taken over instantly. Tell Mom the time. Remind her about parking. Ask whether Dad needed the referral form. Maybe text Dad too, because there was always a chance Mom would forget between hanging up and finding him. Instead, I said, "Dad should call the office and confirm." Mom was silent. "Why would he do that if you already know?" "Because it's his appointment." "What is with you?" "Nothing." "You have the information?" "Yes." "So, why are you making this difficult?" I closed the planner. "I'm not making it difficult. I'm just not managing it." Mom let out a frustrated breath. "You've always handled these things." "I know." "Then why stop now?" The answer came before I had fully formed it. Because I'm realizing that me being good at something doesn't automatically make it my responsibility. Mom laughed like I had made a joke she did not appreciate. "Oh, please, we're your parents. I know who you are. Families help each other." "They do. Then what is this?" "A boundary." She went quiet. I had used the word in professional settings 1,000 times. Scope boundary, contract boundary, access boundary, responsibility boundary. Using it with my mother felt almost ridiculous. Mom recovered quickly. "Is this because of Courtney?" "No, I don't believe you. That doesn't change the answer." She lowered her voice. "Your sister is going through hell right now. Then support her. She thinks you're trying to destroy her career. I'm cooperating with a review she asked for. You could stop it." "No, I can't. Of course, you can tell them it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Mom's tone changed. So, you do want her punished. That framing would have hooked me a month earlier. I would have spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between consequences and punishment, till Mom got tired enough to change the subject. This time, I said, I have work to do. Lauren called Dad about his appointment. Then I ended the call. I sat there afterward, with my hand still resting on the planner. The strange thing was that I did not feel triumphant. I felt guilty. Not because I had done anything wrong, because habit has its own emotional logic. When you spend years making yourself useful before anyone can ask twice. Stopping feels cruel, even when the other person is fully capable. That discomfort told me something important. I had been telling myself for years that my family used me because they expected too much. Some of that was true. But I had also trained them. I answered. I remembered. I fixed. I anticipated. Then I resented them for expecting the service I had made reliable. Courtney had simply taken the same pattern into a more dangerous setting. She pushed me for access. I gave her one small answer. Later, she appeared to have converted that moment into something much larger. I was starting to understand that intelligence did not protect you from creating your own bad incentives. Sometimes it made you better at justifying them. 2 days later, Melissa called with an update. She told me Westbridge had completed most of its review of my conduct. The formal process was not closed yet, but several facts had been verified. My conflict disclosure had been timely. The structure limiting my commercial authority had been approved. The committee's recommendation against a multi-year renewal existed before the promotion dinner. My written correction of Courtney's renewal language existed weeks before Mom's toast. Daniel had independently confirmed that he intended to address Courtney's wording and had already told Karen and me what he would do if she repeated it at the event. The February call remained the only significant boundary concern. No evidence of confidential disclosure has been identified. Melissa said, I did not realize how tightly I had been gripping the phone until my fingers relaxed. What does that mean for me? It means the retaliation allegation is not supported by the evidence we have reviewed so far. So far, I heard the qualifier. What remains? BrightPath is still reviewing how Courtney represented the account internally. We are reviewing one final issue because some of those representations refer to you. The verbal signal. Yes, I didn't give one. I understand your position. That sounds ominous. Melissa gave the smallest laugh. It means I'm not going to conclude BrightPath's review for them. Fair enough, she added. There is one thing I can tell you. Their documentation uses language suggesting Courtney believed she had a level of informal confidence from you that is not reflected in the communications you provided. I leaned back. Informal confidence. That is how I would summarize it. Did she say I promised renewal? Not in the material BrightPath shared with us. Did she say I guaranteed the account? No. Then what exactly are we talking about? Melissa paused. She appears to have represented your reluctance as evidence that she had better visibility into Westbridge's intentions than the formal record showed. For a moment, I did not answer. That was more subtle than a direct lie and more dangerous. Courtney did not need to write. Lauren promised me renewal. She only needed to imply that because her sister sat on the client's side, she had a special read on whether Westbridge intended to stay. My February mistake suddenly looked different. I had not given her confidential information, but I had given her one example she could point to, even privately in her own mind, as proof that I sometimes told her what mattered. I hated that. Not because it made her story true, because it gave her story texture. I never authorized her to use our relationship that way, I said. I know. Did BrightPath ask whether I had? Yes. And we provided the same documentation we reviewed with you. I understood what that meant. BrightPath now had the official disclosure, the committee record, the corrective plan, my correction email, and the private message where I explicitly told Courtney not to confuse more time with renewal. Whatever Courtney had been saying internally would now have to stand beside those records. Melissa told me she would contact me once West formally closed my review. After we hung up, I opened the message thread with Courtney again. I know you're the reason they gave us more time. Thank you. The committee gave Brightpath more time because switching now would hurt Westbridge. Don't confuse that with a renewal. Her response had a simple thumbs up. At the time, I had taken it as acknowledgement. Now, I wondered whether she had read it differently. Maybe she heard only the first part, more time. Maybe she decided that because I had been part of the committee, and because I was her sister, the formal sentence mattered less than what she believed I would do later. Or maybe she knew exactly what I meant and found more useful wording for someone else. I could not know yet. That uncertainty was important. I was learning to stop filling blanks for people. The following Monday, Westbridge formally closed my internal review. Melissa called Karen and me together. The retaliation allegation is not substantiated, she said. We found no evidence that Lauren altered West Burbridge's renewal recommendation because of the family incident. No evidence she disclosed confidential information to Brightpath through Courtney, and no evidence she held unilateral authority over the contract. My shoulders dropped slightly. Melissa continued, "We are documenting a boundary concern regarding the February off-channel conversation. The information itself had already been provided to Brightpath, but direct guidance to a family member outside the account process created unnecessary appearance risk. Going forward, all Brightpath-related communication involving Courtney should have remained within official channels. Understood. You'll be returned to your normal responsibilities once the handoff is completed, although Karen may choose to maintain additional oversight while Brightpath finishes its own review." "That's fine." Melissa looked at me through the screen. "Do you disagree with any part of the finding?" "No." Karen glanced at me again, maybe expecting me to defend myself. I did not. The review had done exactly what I had hoped it would do. It separated what I actually did from what Courtney said I did. I had made one boundary mistake. I had not retaliated. Both things could be true. After the call, I stood at the window beside my desk and let myself feel relieved for about 30 seconds. Then Karen walked into my office. She closed the door. That was the good news. I turned around. "What's the bad news?" Brightpath asked another question. My stomach tightened again. What now? Karen sat in the chair across from my desk. "They're trying to reconcile Courtney's account notes with the communications we provided." "What does that mean?" "She apparently described you more than once as someone who would never discuss Westbridge outside official channels." I frowned. "That's true." Karen nodded, which creates a problem for the complaint she filed later. I stared at her. Courtney had told Brightpath I used our family relationship to pressure her, but before she needed that story, she had apparently been telling people the opposite. Karen continued, "Melissa doesn't want us drawing conclusions before Brightpath completes its review." Neither do I. That was almost true. What exactly did she write?" "I don't have the full email." Brightpath summarized it during the document.reconciliation. Something along the lines of, "You being obsessive about keeping family separate from work and refusing to discuss West Burbridge privately." I remembered Courtney complaining to me about exactly that. "You won't even talk to me about West Burbridge unless everyone's copied." That's the point. It was strange. Hearing my own boundary come back through her words. "Do they think she lied in the complaint?" I asked. "They're investigating inconsistency in her representations." That was corporate language for a question nobody wanted to answer too early. Karen stood. "Go back to work, Lauren." "I am at work. You know what I mean?" She opened the door, then looked back and stopped trying to solve Brightpath's investigation from this side of the building. I smiled despite myself. "I'll try." After she left, I sat down and opened the vendor report I had been reviewing before she arrived. For the first time in weeks, Brightpath was no longer mine to manage. Courtney was no longer mine to manage either. That should have felt like the end of something. Instead, 2 days later, she called me. Her voice was furious. "They took the promotion." I closed my laptop. "What happened?" "They rescinded it." I waited. Courtney laughed bitterly. You're not even going to pretend you're surprised. I knew Brightpath was reviewing the account representation. I didn't know their decision. Well, now you do. I'm sorry. Don't. I mean it. No, you don't. You got exactly what you wanted. I wanted the record corrected, and now I'm the one paying for it. I almost answered. Then I heard something underneath the anger. Fear. What are they doing about your job? I asked. Courtney was silent long enough that I knew the answer was not what I expected. Finally, she said, They haven't fired me. He sat back. They gave me an option. That changed everything. What option? Courtney took a breath, and for the first time since the dinner, the question was no longer whether she would face consequences. It was whether she could live with the one consequence that frightened her more than losing the title, having to admit she had not earned the story everyone was celebrating. Courtney did not answer immediately when I asked what option Brightpath had given her. I could hear traffic somewhere behind her, then the hollow sound of a car door closing. She had probably stepped outside so nobody in the office could hear her. When she finally spoke, the anger had thinned enough for embarrassment to show through. They want me to go back to my odd role. I waited because I could tell there was more. No regional title, no new team, no promotion bonus. I have to correct the Westbridge account notes, sign something saying the way I described the renewal was inaccurate, and go on a performance plan. She said the last two words like they were an insult. So they're letting you keep your job, I said. Courtney gave a short laugh. That's what you hear? That is literally what you just told me. They're humiliating me. They rescinded a promotion. They didn't fire you yet. I asked whether the bonus had already been paid. She said no. It had been tied to the new role and would not vest until the promotion became effective. That made sense. Brightpath was not taking earned wages from her. They were not paying compensation connected to a position she would no longer hold. Courtney, however, was not interested in technical fairness. Daniel told me I can accept the old role and the corrective plan, or I can leave, she said. That's not a real choice. I looked at the closed laptop in front of me. It sounds like a very real choice. Her voice sharpened. Of course you'd say that. You still have your title. Courtney, my title is not involved in this. Exactly. Nothing happened to you. I almost reminded her that I had spent weeks under compliance review because of a complaint she filed against me, that I had been recused from part of my job, that my father had written a statement supporting her version before asking me a single question. Instead, I said Westbridge investigated me. They found a boundary mistake and documented it. I accepted that your company is doing the same thing with you. That is not the same. Why? Because your mistake didn't cost you anything. The answer came so quickly that I knew she believed it. To Courtney, consequences became legitimate only when they hurt someone else less than they hurt her. I thought about arguing, then decided against it. What do you want from me? I asked. She went quiet. I already knew the answer before she said it. Tell Daniel this got too personal. I rubbed my forehead. No, just hear me out. I have been hearing you out for 5 minutes. Tell him the complaint happened because we were both angry. Tell him the family stuff got mixed into the account review. If you say that, he'll understand this whole thing escalated beyond what it needed to. It did get personal. I said you filed a professional complaint accusing me of retaliation after I refused to fix your promotion problem for you. You texted my boss because Mom insulted you. We have already been through this. Then tell him that part of your decision was emotional. I already told Westbridge exactly that. Courtney went silent. You what? Compliance asked whether I was angry. I said yes. They asked whether Mom's insult affected my decision to send the message. I said yes. I also told them the account problem existed before the dinner. Daniel had already said he would address it if you repeated the claim. And I did not create the business issue. So you admitted it. I told the truth and they still cleared you. There was something almost offended in her voice. They found no retaliation and no confidential disclosure. They did document that I should not have answered your February call outside the account channel. Courtney exhaled. Unbelievable. Which part? You make a mistake and everybody calls it judgment. I make a mistake and they take my promotion. I let that sit for a moment. Did they take your promotion because you used the wrong word once? She did not answer. Courtney, they said there was a pattern, then stopped calling it one mistake. You don't know what they said. You just told me. She muttered something under her breath. I continued before she could redirect the conversation. You have an option to keep your job. If you think BritPath's decision is unfair, use whatever internal process they give you, but I am not going to call Daniel and ask him to reinterpret your account record. Courtney's voice dropped. You cold. That is exactly why I won't. What does that even mean? It means you spent weeks accusing me of having too much influence over your career. I am not going to prove your complaint wrong by doing the thing you claimed I was doing. She did not speak for several seconds. Then the anger drained out of her voice so abruptly that I almost missed the change. If I sign this, Mom will know. I had expected something about future earnings references or whether she would ever get promoted again. Instead, she said, Mom, know what? I asked. Courtney gave a brittle laugh. Don't make me say it. You called me. She thinks I earned this promotion because I saved Westbridge. She's told everyone. Aunt Diane knows. Dad's friends know. She posted that stupid picture from the dinner. She keeps telling people I'm moving into regional leadership. I leaned back slowly. So tell her the promotion changed. Changed? Courtney snapped. You mean tell her it's gone? Yes. And tell her why. That part is up to you. You know what she'll think. No, I know what you're afraid she'll think. Courtney's breathing went uneven for a moment. She'll know I wasn't what she thought. The sentence was so quiet, I almost asked her to repeat it. Instead, I stayed silent. For years, I had assumed Courtney enjoyed being Mom's favorite because favoritism benefited her. I had not thought much about the maintenance costs. Courtney did not just receive admiration. She had built part of her identity around never losing it. Then, let her know, I said. Courtney's laugh this time had no humor in it. God, you make everything sound simple. It isn't simple. You don't understand what that does to me. I looked at the stack of papers still sitting near my desk from my compliance review. I understand exactly what it does. No, you don't, Courtney. I spent most of my adult life listening to Mom explain why your success meant something about me. Every promotion you got became evidence that I was too quiet. Every client dinner became evidence that you understood business and I understood paperwork. Every time you did something visible, she used it to rank us. The only difference is that I already know what it feels like to be on the losing side of that ranking. That's not my fault. I didn't say all of it was. Mom has always been like that. Yes, then why are you acting like I created it? I'm not. I stopped because I could hear how close we were to a conversation neither of us was ready to finish. At that point, I still did not know how much Courtney had said to Mom over the years. I had noticed recycled phrases and convenient misunderstandings, but I did not yet have proof of anything larger. I'm saying, you have a choice right now that has nothing to do with me. You can tell Mom the promotion was rescinded and keep your job, or you can decide being the version of yourself she celebrates matters more than having a job to go back to. That's cruel. No, cruel would be me wanting you to lose the job, don't you? No, she scoffed. You expect me to believe that? I don't need you unemployed for the record to be accurate. You always have an answer. You asked me a question. Courtney's voice shook. You have no idea what this feels like. Then tell me. She was silent again, and when she spoke, the words came more quickly. I walk into that house and Mom looks at me like I'm the one thing she got right. Do you understand that? She tells people about me before I even sit down. She introduces me by my job. She asks what client I'm working on. She makes everything sound bigger, but at least she's proud. If I go back there and tell her they took it away because I overstated an account, do you know what happens? I did not answer for her. She'll look at me differently. There it was. Not money, not career trajectory, not even humiliation at work. The thing Courtney feared most was one look from our mother. I thought about 13-year-old Courtney in the passenger seat of Dad's old car, staring straight ahead while telling me she did not care what those girls at school thought. She had cared so much, she had changed the route she took home. I had understood that girl because I had known the difference between pretending not to need approval and actually not needing it. Somewhere along the way, Courtney had become much better at earning approval and much worse at surviving without it. "I'm sorry that scares you," I said. "Don't pity me." "I'm not. It sounds like it. I'm saying you have a chance to stop making the next decision based on what Mom will think. You say that because Mom doesn't care what you do." The sentence hurt more than I wanted it to. Not because it was entirely true, but because Courtney used it like a weapon without noticing that it described the exact family problems she had spent years pretending did not exist. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I stopped building my life around earning the reaction I wanted from her." Courtney gave a bitter laugh. "Right. That's why you came to my promotion dinner." "I came because you're my sister." "Some sister." I nearly ended the call then. Instead, I said, "Bright Path is giving you a way to stay. I'm not going to call Daniel. I'm not going to tell him to fire you. I'm not going to tell him to save you. This is yours now. What if I refuse to sign? That's between you and Bright Path. What if I leave? Also between you and Bright Path, and you'll just sit there." I looked around my office. "Yes." She made a small sound I could not identify. Then the call ended for the rest of the day. I kept exuding guilt to push me back toward action. It did not. I felt sad. I felt angry. I even felt protective of Courtney in a way I wished I did not. But I did not feel responsible for solving the decision she had been given. That difference was new. 2 days passed without hearing from her. On the third, Karen stopped by my office and leaned against the doorframe. Bright Path formally corrected the West Burbridge status in their internal account record, she said. Daniel confirmed the promotion won't proceed. I nodded. Courtney told me. Karen gave me a careful look. How much did she tell you? Enough. I'm not going to ask. Good, she smiled slightly. Westbridge has what it needs. Your review is closed. Unless Brightpath sends us something directly related to you. You're done. I like the sound of that. Then enjoy it. I tried. For almost a week, life felt surprisingly normal. I returned to the meetings I had missed. Karen kept another manager copied on Brightpath Matters for a while, which I thought was sensible. I worked through 2 unrelated vendor issues. One contract transition and a store escalation that had nothing to do with my family. The absence of drama felt almost luxurious. Mom called once and left a voicemail saying Courtney was under enormous stress and I should reach out because sisters shouldn't let work come between them. I deleted it without responding. Dad sent me a text asking whether I wanted to get coffee. I told him not yet. I was not trying to punish him. I simply did not want to sit across from him while he explained again that he had only written what he saw. Courtney did not contact me. I wondered whether she had accepted Brightpath's offer. I did not ask. That restraint was harder than it sounds. For years, if I knew a family problem existed, I wanted information because information made action possible. If Courtney was keeping the job, I wanted to know. If she was quitting, I wanted to know. If Mom knew the promotion was gone, I wanted to know. Every unanswered question felt like something I should resolve. I made myself leave them unanswered. Then, late on a Tuesday afternoon, Melissa from Westbridge Compliance called. Her name appearing on my phone was enough to change my breathing. Hey Melissa Lauren, I need to verify a set of communications Brightpath received as part of their ongoing internal review. I sat down. What communications? They submitted several screenshots involving you and Courtney. Brightpath wants confirmation that the messages are authentic and whether there is additional relevant context. My hand tuckened around the phone. Submitted by whom? Melissa paused. Courtney, I closed my eyes. Can you send me what they provided? Yes, I'm sending only the messages involving Westbridge. We're not reopening the prior review at this point. This is verification. An email arrived while she was still speaking. I opened the first attachment. The screenshot showed my name at the top and one of my messages from February. You need to clear the backlog before Monday. Nothing above it, nothing below it. No, Courtney asking me to tell her what Westbridge really wanted. No, me refusing to discuss internal decisions. No reference to the corrective plan her company had already received. Just one sentence that, standing alone, looked like I had privately told my sister exactly what the client needed her to do. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Melissa asked, "Is that your message?" Yes. Is that the complete exchange? No. How much is missing? Enough to change what it looks like. There was a short pause on her end. Do you still have the full thread? Yes. Please don't edit or crop anything. Export the relevant conversation as completely as you can and send it through the secure link I'm about to provide. I will. After we hung up, I opened my phone and found the February thread. The context was exactly where I remembered it. Courtney had written that she could not fix the account if she did not know what Westbridge was really thinking. I had told her I was not discussing internal decisions and that Bright Path already had the corrective plan. She had pushed again. I had told her to read it. Only after that had I written the sentence she had submitted by itself. You need to clear the backlog before Monday. I stared at the two versions side by side. Courtney had spent weeks insisting I used our relationship to manipulate her career. Now she had taken the one boundary mistake I had admitted, removed the part where I enforced the boundary, and handed the remainder to her employer as proof. I did not call her. I did not text Mom. I did not ask Dad whether he knew. I opened the secure link Melissa sent me and began exporting the entire relevant thread. For the first time since Bright Path had offered Courtney a way to keep her job, I understood that she had made a decision. It just was not the one I had hoped she would make. I exported the February thread exactly as Melissa had requested. I did not highlight anything, add commentary, or try to explain what Courtney had done. I sent the complete exchange, the original timestamps, and the corrective action plan Bright Path had already received before our private conversation. Then I added one sentence through the secure portal. This is the complete relevant thread associated with the screenshot provided. Afterward, I opened Courtney's version beside mine. Her screenshot showed only one message from me. You need to clear the backlog before Monday. By itself, it looked like private client guidance. What it did not show was Courtney asking me to tell her what Westbridge was really thinking, my refusal to discuss internal decisions, or my direction to go back to the corrective plan her company already had. The full exchange was not flattering to me, but it was accurate. I had crossed a boundary by answering her privately at all. Westbridge had already told me that, and I agreed. What I had not done was give Courtney confidential information, promise that the account was safe, or secretly coach her through a client problem. The backlog requirement was already written in BrightPath's corrective plan before I sent that message. The Monday timing was attached to an existing milestone. My mistake was access, not disclosure. Courtney's screenshot removed precisely the part that made that distinction visible. Melissa called the next morning. She confirmed that Westbridge had verified when BrightPath received the corrective plan and that the backlog requirement predated my message. She asked whether there had been any separate discussion where I gave Courtney new information. I told her no. She asked whether I had created the Monday deadline myself. Again, no. It was already tied to the corrective process. When she finished, I asked the question I had been trying not to ask. Why did Courtney submit only that sentence? Melissa paused before answering. I can't tell you her motive, Lauren. BrightPath will have to determine how the material was presented and what weight to give the missing context. It was exactly the kind of answer I would have given someone else. And I hated how little comfort it provided. For 2 days, I heard nothing. That was harder than cooperating with my own review because I had no action to take. When Westbridge investigated me, I could produce documents, answer questions, and admit where my judgment had been imperfect. BrightPath's process was not mine. I did not know what Courtney had said when she submitted the screenshots. I did not know whether she claimed they were complete, whether she called them examples, or whether someone else had simply asked for supporting messages, and she chose the ones that helped her. I kept catching myself inventing possible explanations, then stopping. I had spent too much time criticizing my family for turning assumptions into facts to start doing the same thing now. Daniel eventually asked for a call with Karen and me. He looked exhausted when he joined. We verified the material Bright Path asked Westbridge to review. He said the backlog requirement and timing were already part of the corrective information our team had received. We have no basis to claim Lauren provided confidential Westbridge information in that exchange. Karen asked whether Bright Path had any remaining concern about me. Daniel said no. Beyond the off-channel boundary issue, Westbridge had already documented. Then he added, the supplemental material submitted to us omitted context that was material to understanding the exchange. We're handling that internally. I chose my words carefully. Are you saying the messages were altered? Daniel shook his head. I'm saying the screenshots did not include the preceding messages, and the way the exchange was presented required us to verify whether additional relevant context existed. Your full thread confirmed that it did. That was all he would say, and it was enough. Courtney had not invented my words. She had done something subtler. She had selected the part that looked useful and removed the part that made it less useful. Whether Bright Path ultimately called that careless, misleading, or dishonest was their decision. Mom called that night already angry. Did you send Bright Path private messages between you and your sister? She demanded. I told her yes, because Bright Path had asked Westbridge to verify messages Courtney submitted first. Mom barely acknowledged that. Those were private conversations. I reminded her that Courtney had made them part of a professional complaint. Mom said Courtney was trying to defend herself. So was I replied. She asked why I could not simply confirm that the screenshot was accurate. Because the sentence was mine, but the context was missing. Mom made a frustrated sound. Why does everything with you have to become technical? I gave her an example simple enough that she could not hide behind that word. If I texted you, I'm done with Dad, but the message before it said, I'm done with Dad's insurance paperwork, would those mean the same thing? Mom went quiet. Then she said Courtney wasn't trying to trick anyone. I asked why she had not sent the entire exchange. Mom replied that Courtney told her Bright Path only needed the relevant part. Who decided what was relevant? I asked. Mom did not answer. Instead, she said, they already took her promotion. What more do you want? I told her I wanted nothing from Bright Path except the truth about my own conduct. You always have to win, she said. No, I answered. I need the record to be true. The following week was strangely normal. I went back to reviewing vendors that had nothing to do with my sister. I attended meetings where nobody cared about my mother, my father, or the promotion dinner. Problems arrived as numbers instead of accusations, and I found the predictability comforting. Then Daniel scheduled one more call. This time Melissa joined too, which told me whatever Bright Path had decided affected Westbridge enough to close formally. Daniel started with the client relationship. Bright Path had corrected its internal description of Westbridge and removed any suggestion that a long-term renewal had been secured. Then he said, we've also completed the internal employment matter connected to the representations we reviewed. Courtney is no longer employed by Bright Path. I did not speak for several seconds. I had imagined hearing those words and expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt a heavy sadness settle in my chest. Courtney had worked hard for parts of her career. She had legitimate strengths. She had also been given a chance to keep her job after losing the promotion, and somehow things had moved beyond that point. Daniel did not describe Courtney's termination meeting, and I did not ask. I had no right to know whether she argued, cried, denied anything, or simply walked out. He gave Westbridge only what we needed. The supplemental evidence submitted regarding Lauren omitted material context. He said, Bright Path is not raising any additional concern about Lauren's conduct. We consider the client-side issue closed. After that, the call moved into practical matters. Bright Path had assigned a new account lead. Transition work would continue. I took notes because the business relationship did not disappear just because my sister had. Courtney called late that afternoon. Her voice was ired me. I told her I had been informed that she no longer worked there. She laughed bitterly. Of course Daniel told you. I explained that Bright Path had notified Westbridge because the account contact changed. She accused me of lying, then said, "They said I misled the review." I stayed quiet. "They said the screenshots omitted material context," she continued. "I didn't fake your messages. I didn't change a word." I told her I knew that. "Then how is that dishonest?" she demanded. I asked one question. "Did you tell them those screenshots were the full relevant exchange?" Courtney hesitated. "They asked for proof you were coaching me." "That wasn't my question." Her voice sharpened. "You're not HR?" "No, I'm the person whose messages you submitted." She said she had shown them the messages that mattered. I asked what happened when Bright Path discovered the earlier part of the thread. Courtney became angrier. "Because you sent them everything. Because they asked whether your screenshot was complete." She snapped that I had made her look like a liar. "I didn't crop anything," I said. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Courtney finally said they were already looking for a reason to blame me. I asked what happened to the option they had given her before the screenshots. She did not answer. The old role, the performance plan, the correction. "What happened to that?" I asked. "They pulled it," she said. After the screenshots, another pause. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. That sequence mattered because it meant what I had suspected was true. Courtney had not lost the job automatically when the promotion disappeared. She had still had a way to stay. "What did they tell you?" I asked. Courtney sounded tired now instead of furious. "They said they could manage a performance problem, but they couldn't manage it if they couldn't trust what I submitted during an active review." I closed my eyes. Yes, there it was. Not the lost Westbridge account, not my message to Daniel, not Mom's toast. Trust. Courtney rushed to defend herself. She said she had not meant to hide anything, only to show the messages that supported her point. She said the earlier lines were irrelevant. She said Bright Path had turned a normal screenshot into some kind of integrity test. I could not know exactly what happened inside her HR meetings, and I did not pretend to. I only knew what Daniel officially told Westbridge and what Courtney was telling me now. Both versions agreed on the important part. She had submitted a partial exchange after being given a path to keep her job, and Bright Path concluded the omission mattered enough to change how they judged her integrity. "Courtney, you had a way to stay," I said. "Stop saying that." "It's true. They were humiliating me. They were asking you to correct the account record. They wanted me to admit I lied." "Did Westbridge have a multi-year renewal?" She did not answer. "Did I promise you one privately?" Silence. "Did I tell you the account was shife?" Not in those exact words. I felt exhausted rather than angry. "That's the problem." "No," she said. "The problem is that you never tried to help me." For a moment, I almost laughed at the unfairness of it. Then I remembered February. "I did help you." I answered a call I should have refused. "I pointed you back to a plan your company already had because you were scared." Westbridge later documented that I should not have done even that privately, and then you took one sentence from that conversation and tried to use it as proof that I was secretly coaching you. That's not what happened. It's what happened from my side. Your side is all you care about. No, it's the only side I can honestly tell you. Courtney's voice softened. Mom knows I'd been waiting for that about the job. Everything. What did you tell her? Courtney gave a tired laugh. That Bright Path fired me after you sent them private messages. I rubbed my forehead. You submitted part of the messages first. There you go again, she said. You always need the footnote, and you always need the version that hurts least. She hung up. Mom called less than an hour later. Your sister lost her job, she said as if I might not know. I told her I did. Do you understand what you've done? I reminded her that I did not work for Bright Path and had no authority to fire Courtney. Mom ignored that. Why didn't you warn her they'd ask for the whole conversation for a second? I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Warn her. You knew you had the full messages. You could have told her before sending them. I said I didn't know she was planning to submit part of the conversation as evidence. She wasn't trying to deceive anyone. Then the whole conversation should not have hurt her. Mom went quiet, then accused me of always knowing how to make myself sound reasonable after the fact. I told her Courtney had been offered a way to keep her job. Mom said that option would have destroyed her career anyway. No, I replied. It would have damaged her pride. Mom exploded that I had no idea how hard Courtney had worked. I said I never denied that. Then why are you determined to tear her down? She asked. I'm not. You sent evidence against your own sister. She sent evidence against me first. That's different. Mom did not explain why, because we both knew the answer. Courtney defending herself was loyalty. Me defending myself was betrayal. That rule had existed in my family long before Bright Path. I'm done discussing her employment with you. I said, you don't get to decide when this is over. I get to decide when I stay on the phone. Then I hung up. For the next 3 days, Mom sent messages accusing me of destroying Courtney's future. Dad sent one asking whether we could talk after things calmed down. I did not answer. Nobody needed me to solve a medical bill, find a reservation, remember an appointment, or organize a trip. For once, the thing they wanted me to fix was not practical. They wanted me to fix the meaning of what had happened. They wanted Courtney to remain the victim and me to become the cause. I let their messages sit unanswered. By Friday, Bright Path had assigned a new account lead. The transition meeting was ordinary. Nobody congratulated me for Courtney's departure. Nobody treated it as my victory. We talked about delivery schedules, open corrective items, and who would handle communication going forward. That was exactly how I wanted it. That evening, I went home early and made dinner. Around 7, someone knocked on my door. I was not expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole first. Courtney stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a gray sweater instead of one of the polished suits I associated with work. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, and she looked more tired than I had ever seen her. For half a second, I saw the 13-year-old girl who used to climb into my car after school and pretend she had not needed me to pick her up. Then I opened the door. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking. You knew they were going to fire me. I held the door and met her eyes. No, I said, I knew they gave you a choice. Courtney stayed in my doorway after I told her I had known only that Bright Path had given her a choice. For a moment, neither of us moved. She looked exhausted, but underneath the exhaustion was the same anger I had heard on the phone. You could have warned me, she said. I asked what I was supposed to warn her about. That if I submitted those messages, they'd ask for everything. I stared at her. Courtney, you submitted my private messages as evidence that I had been secretly coaching you. You expected me not to provide the full conversation. She looked away. I thought they'd look at what mattered. They did. Her jaw tightened. You always do that. You make everything sound clean after it's over. I stepped back from the door, but did not invite her farther inside. They gave you your old role. They gave you a performance plan. They gave you a way to keep working. You decided the bigger problem was admitting the West Burbridge story wasn't what everyone thought it was. Her face changed when I said that. Not softer exactly, but less certain. You don't know what it was like, she said. You keep saying that as if nobody has ever been disappointed in me. That's not what I mean. Then, what do you mean? Courtney pressed her lips together. Mom looked at me like I finally proved something. For once, I wasn't just doing okay. I was the one moving up. The one she could brag about. I told her I understood that better than she wanted to admit. She shook her head. No, you decided a long time ago you didn't need her approval. That doesn't mean it never hurt. Courtney gave a bitter laugh. You had the luxury of deciding it didn't matter. I felt the old pull to defend myself, to list the years when every achievement of hers became a comparison. I never agreed to enter. Instead, I asked, "What exactly did you want me to do?" She looked at me then, and the answer was already in her face. "Help me!" I nodded slowly. "That's the problem. You still think helping you means making the consequences disappear." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "You think you're better than me?" "No. I think you had a way out, and you chose another version of the story. You make it sound like I planned all of this." "I don't know what you planned. I know what you did." Courtney stared at me for several seconds, then said, "Mom wants us all together Sunday." I almost laughed. Of course she did. For what? She says this family needs to stop tearing itself apart. Did she say who she thinks is doing the tearing? Courtney did not answer. That was answer enough. I told her I would go once, not to reconcile, not to repair her career. I would go because I was tired of every conversation happening through Mom, Dad, or whatever version Courtney had given them. Courtney nodded, but she did not look relieved. Before leaving, she said, "She's going to ask why you had to send everything." I replied, "Then she can ask me." Sunday dinner felt familiar enough to be unsettling. Same dining room, same framed family photographs, same chair Mom always expected me to take because it was closest to the kitchen, useful if something needed carrying. I chose the chair across from Courtney instead. Dad noticed but said nothing. Mom spent the first 10 minutes pretending we were having a normal meal. She asked whether I wanted more potatoes, told Courtney she looked tired, and complained that Dad had forgotten to pick up sparkling water. Nobody mentioned Bright Path until the plates were half empty. Then Mom put her fork down and said, "I think we all need to remember that no matter what happened, Courtney never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her. Is that what this dinner is about? It's about perspective. Courtney shifted in her chair. Mom continued, "You keep acting like your sister has spent her whole life plotting against you, and that's simply not true." She talked. "I never said she spent her whole life plotting against me. You implied it." "No, I said. She told different people different versions of the truth when it benefited her." Mom reached for her phone. "Fine. Then. Look." She opened a message thread with Courtney and started scrolling here. Years of messages. If she hated you so much, why would she talk about you constantly? I almost told her I was not interested. Then one line caught my eye because I had heard it before. "Lauren's title sounds bigger than it is." I reached for the phone. Mom hesitated, then handed it to me. I scrolled. She doesn't actually decide anything important. She mostly handles the paperwork after other people make the call. A few months later, "Don't ask Lauren about my accounts. She gets weird whenever I'm doing better than her." Then, "Mom, seriously, stop comparing us in front of her. She takes it personally because she thinks I have the more impressive job." My stomach tightened, but not because the messages were shocking individually. That was what made them worse. None of them sounded like cartoon villain. They sounded casual, reasonable, like Courtney was helping Mom understand me. I looked up at Courtney. She had gone pale. Mom leaned forward. "See, she was trying to protect your feelings." "No," I said. "She was explaining my feelings for me." Courtney crossed her arms. "You did get weird about the account. I corrected you. You always corrected me because you kept calling an extension a renewal." Mom sighed. "There you go again." I held up the phone. "Mom, these are the exact phrases you've used about me for years." She frowned. "Lauren mostly handles paperwork. Lauren doesn't make the important decisions. Lauren gets weird when Courtney is doing better. You didn't invent those." Mom looked from me to Courtney. Courtney said, "I was trying to keep you two from fighting." I almost smiled at the audacity of it. "By telling her I was threatened by your success. That's how it felt to you." Courtney looked down. I took out my own phone and opened the April thread I had already submitted during the review. I did not show Mom any internal Westbridge documents. I did not need to. I turned the screen toward her. Courtney's message was still there. "I know you're the reason they gave us more time. Thank you. And mine beneath it. The committee gave Bright Path more time because switching now would hurt Westbridge. Don't confuse that with a renewal." Mom read both twice. I put the two phones side by side on the table. Which Courtney were you listening to? I asked. The one who knew exactly what my role was when she needed something from me, or the one who told you I was basically doing paperwork and getting jealous whenever she succeeded? Mom's expression hardened first in confusion, then anger. Not at herself, not even at me. At Courtney, why would you do this to us? The words came out before I could stop myself. To May. Mom turned toward me. What? She did it to me. You're already turning this into something that happened to the family. I didn't mean you keep saying you didn't know. I didn't. You didn't check. Mom stared at me. I continued before she could retreat. Into Courtney manipulated me. Yes, Courtney fed you a version that made her look bigger and me look smaller. But you liked that version. It was simple. Courtney was the daughter you could brag about. I was the one you called when something needed fixing. You never had to ask whether that was fair because the arrangement worked for you. Mom's eyes filled with tears. So now this is my fault. Your part is. Dad finally spoke. Lauren. I turned to him. He had been quiet almost the entire time. Your mother didn't know all of this. Neither did you. He looked down. But you knew enough. Dad rubbed a hand over his face. I knew the comparisons got out of hand sometimes. Sometimes. I didn't want every dinner turning into a fight, so you laughed. He looked at me. What? At the promotion dinner. Mom called me useless and you laughed. Dad's face tightened. I was trying to make it less awkward. For who? He did not answer. I leaned back. You weren't confused, Dad. You were comfortable. That hurt him. I could see it immediately. He nodded once slowly. You're right. Mom looked at him as if he had betrayed her. Dad continued. I knew Linda went too far sometimes. I knew Courtney liked being the favorite, and I kept telling myself if I stayed out of it, I wasn't choosing a side. I felt some of my anger loosen, but not enough to disappear. I'm sorry, he said. I believe you. His eyes lifted hopefully. That doesn't mean I trust you the way I did. The hope faded. Courtney pushed her chair back slightly. This is unbelievable. Nobody answered. She looked at Mom, then Dad, then me. So, what happens now? She gets to be the good daughter. The room went completely quiet. I looked at her and finally understood how deeply she still believed in the ranking, even after it had cost her almost everything. There shouldn't have been one. Courtney's face crumpled for half a second before she forced it still. Mom started crying then, but I did not rush to comfort her. Dad did not tell me I was being cruel. Courtney did not have another clever answer. For once, nobody could turn what I had said into a competition because I had refused the competition itself. I left before dessert. Mom followed me to the front door. Lauren, I turned. Her voice was smaller now. We know now how important your job really is. I looked at her and felt tired rather than angry. That's still not the point. By August, enough time had passed that I could finally think about the promotion dinner without feeling as if I were still sitting in that private room with Mom's champagne glass raised over her head. The story had stopped changing every morning. Bright Path had finished its review. Westbridge had closed mine. Courtney no longer worked there. Dad and I had spoken more than once. Mom and I could get through a phone call without reopening every argument from the previous 2 months. Nothing had gone back to normal. And I had finally accepted that normal was exactly what I did not want back. Courtney was looking for another job. Despite the way Mom talked about it, she had not been blacklisted from the industry or marked permanently as unemployable. Her career had taken a serious hit, but it had not disappeared. She still had years of legitimate sales experience, strong numbers on accounts that had nothing to do with Westbridge, and a real talent for building client relationships. What changed was the level at which she could realistically re-enter. Before Bright Path, Courtney had already started introducing herself as someone moving into regional leadership. Now she was applying for account roles closer to the position she had held before the promotion. Some recruiters stopped calling once they asked enough questions about why the promotion had been rescinded and why her employment had ended so soon afterward. Others kept talking to her. The consequences were real, but they were not theatrical. She was not ruined. She was simply no longer protected from the cost of what she had done. Mom treated that distinction as cruelty. Every few days, she found a different way to ask me to intervene. Courtney had paid enough. Courtney had learned her lesson. Courtney needed one person to give her a chance. Courtney was too embarrassed to ask me herself, so maybe I could discreetly make a few calls. That last suggestion came one Saturday morning while I was standing in my kitchen cutting strawberries into a bowl. "You know people," Mom said. "So does Courtney. She knows salespeople. You know decision makers." I put the knife down. "That doesn't make them mine to use for her," Mom sighed. "You could at least ask whether anyone's hiring. Anyone can ask that. You know what I mean?" I did. She wanted me to take some of the credibility I had spent years building and transfer it to Courtney with a phone call. A few months earlier, I might have convinced myself that doing that was not really rescuing her. I would have called it networking. Then I probably would have reviewed Courtney's resume because I was already involved. Then I might have helped her prepare an explanation for Bright Path. If she got an interview, I would have coached her through the questions she was afraid of. If she did not get the job, I might have called someone afterward and asked whether there was anything she could improve. By the time I realized I was carrying the whole thing, I would have been angry at everyone for expecting me to carry it. That pattern was obvious to me now. "I'm not doing that," I said. Mom was quiet for a moment. "Why are you still punishing her?" "I'm not. She lost her promotion and her job. I know. What else do you want?" "Nothing. Then help her." I picked up the knife again. "Those two things are not opposites." Mom made a frustrated sound. "You always have to make everything complicated." "No, I'm actually making this simpler. Her next job is her responsibility. You could make it easier." "That doesn't mean I should." "So, your reputation matters more than your sister." "My reputation belongs to me. Her career belongs to her." Mom did not like that answer because there was no accusation in it for her to fight. I was not saying Courtney deserved to suffer forever. I was not saying I would never speak to her again. I was only refusing to take ownership of a problem that belonged to another adult. Courtney contacted me a few nights later. It was almost 11 when her message appeared. There was no missed call, no demand, no accusation, just one sentence. "I don't know who I am if I'm not the successful one." I sat on the edge of my bed and read it again. For several seconds, I was not thinking about Bright Path. I was thinking about Courtney at 13, sitting in the passenger seat of Dad's old car while I drove her home from school. She had stared through the windshield and pretended the girls making her life miserable did not matter. I remembered her sleeping on my floor during thunderstorms when we were younger and insisting she was only there because my room was cooler. I remembered her climbing into my car before I left for college and making me promise I would not become someone who came home jolly for Christmas. I still loved that version of my sister. That was the inconvenient part. I considered calling her. The instinct came so quickly that I nearly obeyed it. I could imagine exactly how the conversation would go. She would tell me she had no idea what to say in interviews. I would help her build an answer. She would tell me she was scared nobody would hire her. I would remind her of the strengths she still had. Then I would start thinking about people I knew who might be able to give her a chance. I stopped myself. Courtney had not asked me to solve anything. For once, she had simply told me how she felt. I did not need to turn vulnerability into a task. I typed, "Then maybe this is the first time you get to find out." I stared at the sentence before sending it. It was not soft enough to rescue her and not cruel enough to punish her. That was probably why it felt right. She did not reply that night. I let the silence remain. Dad's behavior changed differently. He did not suddenly become outspoken or start challenging Mom every time she said something unfair. I would not have trusted that kind of overnight transformation anyway. Instead, he started doing small things that were harder to perform and easier to believe. The first sign was a text about his cardiology appointment. They moved me to Thursday at 10:30. I already put it in my calendar. I smiled when I read it. Dad had spent years telling me dates while somehow making them my responsibility the moment the words left his mouth. This time, he was not asking me to remember anything. I replied, "Good." A few days later, he called. I answered expecting a practical problem. "Do you want to get coffee?" he asked. "What happened?" "Nothing. No doctor issue? No insurance? No car?" Dad laughed. "Am I only allowed to call when something breaks?" "You trained me." That sounds familiar. I almost said no to the invitation. I still remembered his statement. I remembered how quickly he had helped Courtney write down the sequence of the promotion dinner without asking me what had happened before it. More than that, I remembered how many years I had excused him by calling him passive. Dad did not like conflict. That was true. What I had finally understood was that avoiding conflict could still become a decision when the same person benefited every time. Still, refusing every attempt he made because he had failed before would have been another kind of reflex. "I can do Saturday morning," I said. We met near my office. Dad arrived before me, which was unusual enough that I noticed. He had already ordered coffee for himself and had not ordered mine because, as he put it, he was trying to stop, assuming he knew what everyone wanted. "That sounds exhausting," I said. "Apparently, adulthood requires effort." We talked about ordinary things first. A road project near his house, baseball, one of his friends who had taken up woodworking and nearly destroyed his garage door. I was grateful for the normal conversation because neither of us needed another 2-hour emotional confrontation. Eventually, Dad set down his cup. "I keep thinking about that statement." I nodded. "I should have called you." "Yes. I told myself Courtney only wanted me to write what I saw. You wrote what you thought it meant too." "I know." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper cup. "I think I did that a lot." "What?" "Told myself I was only watching." I waited. "Your mother would say something. Courtney would react. You'd get quiet. I'd think if I stayed out of it, it would blow over. It usually did. That made it easy." I looked at him. "I thought keeping the peace meant not making anything worse," he said. "I didn't understand how often that meant letting somebody else take the hit. That's because the hit usually wasn't yours." He nodded slowly. There was no defense attached to it. That mattered more than the apology that came next. "I'm sorry. I know. I don't expect that to fix anything." "Good." Dad smiled faintly. "You really don't make this easy." "No, I probably deserve that." We sat quietly for a moment. Then I said, "I believe you're trying." He looked up. That was as much as I could give him. Honestly, it was enough for that morning. Afterward, Dad kept changing through small actions. He scheduled his own appointments. He found his own insurance information. Once he sent me a picture of an appointment card and wrote, "Evidence that I didn't lose it." I laughed and replied without adding the date to my planner. Mom's adjustment was harder. She understood that calling me useless had been cruel. She understood, at least intellectually, that Courtney had fed her a distorted picture of my career. But Mom still seemed to think the lesson was that she should appreciate me more for everything I did. That was not the lesson. One afternoon, she called while I had my paper planner open on the desk. "Do you remember when Dad's follow-up is?" My eyes dropped automatically. "Thursday, 10:30. "Yes," I said. "What time?" I stopped. For years, having the answer had felt like a reason to provide it. "You'll need to ask Dad." Mom paused. "But you know." "Yes, then just tell me. You can ask Dad, Lauren." "Why would I call him when I already have you?" I almost laughed, because the sentence was more honest than anything she had said about the pattern. That's exactly the problem. "What problem?" "You think, because I know something, I'm responsible for managing it. It's an appointment time, I know. So why are you turning it into a whole thing?" "I'm not. I'm telling you to ask the person whose appointment it is." Mom sighed. "You always handled these things before." "I know. Then what changed?" I stopped assuming that being able to help means I always should. That sounds selfish. Maybe it sounds selfish because you benefited from the old arrangement. Mom went silent. The sentence did not make me feel triumphant. It made me uncomfortable. That was something I was learning about boundaries. Sometimes the correct one still felt rude because the old pattern had trained everyone involved to expect. "Nar." Mom tried again. "I thought we were moving past this." "We are. This doesn't feel like moving past it. What would that look like to you? Being normal again. There it was. Normal. The word people use when they want old access restored without examining whether the old arrangement worked for everyone. I don't want the old normal back. Then what do you want? I looked at the planner. I want Dad to handle Dad's appointments. I want you to ask for help instead of assuming I'll give it. And I want to be allowed to say no without you treating it as proof. I don't care about you. Mom was quiet for a long time. That sounds very clinical. It's actually simple. She never got the appointment time from me, Dad told her himself. Nothing collapsed. That mattered more than it should have. Professionally, life settled faster. BrightPath assigned a new account lead. Westbridge continued managing the transition. I kept another manager, copied on BrightPath communications for several weeks, even after compliance no longer required it. Nobody asked me to do that. I did it because I had learned something from February. If admitting a mistake changes nothing about how you behave afterward, the admission is mostly performance. The new BrightPath contact was competent and pleasantly uninterested in my family. We discussed delivery metrics, corrective deadlines, and transition planning. That was all. A few weeks later, I walked into a quarterly review with a completely different vendor. There were .8 people in the room. None of them knew Courtney. None knew Mom had once called me useless in front of a room full of strangers. None knew I had spent weeks under compliance review because my sister had tried to turn a private family dynamic into a professional defense. They knew my name. They knew my role. That was enough. The vendor had missed 2 service targets. Their operations director explained that a staffing change and system migration had caused the delays. They believed the problem was temporary. I listened, asked whether the migration was complete, whether backlog was declining, and whether the next reporting cycle would produce clean enough data to measure improvement. One of my colleagues looked at me. What's your recommendation? A year earlier, that question would have given me a private sense of satisfaction. This was where nobody could call me useless. This was the room where people needed my judgment. That day, the feeling was quieter. I did not need their need. I simply had a responsibility. One corrective cycle, I said. No additional extension without measurable improvement. The procurement lead nodded. Someone wrote it down. The meeting continued. Nobody applauded. Nobody told me I was brilliant. Nobody's raised a glass and declared me the daughter worth celebrating. I did not need them to. When the meeting ended, my phone buzzed as I walked back toward my office. The family group chat. Mom had written, "Does anyone remember the company that serviced the furnace last year?" I knew immediately. Midstate Heating. I had the invoice saved. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then Dad replied, "I'll check the receipt folder." A minute later, Courtney wrote, "I think it was Midstate." Dad answered, "Found it." Yep. I stopped walking and stared at the messages. Nobody had called me. Nobody had asked me to confirm. They had solved a small problem without the person who had always solved it fastest. I locked my phone and put it away. Nothing terrible happened. That should have been obvious. It felt revolutionary. Courtney and I were not close again. Not yet. Maybe we never would be in the way we had been when we were younger. Eventually, she found another job with a smaller company in a role below the one she had lost. I learned that from Dad, not because I investigated. I did not call anyone there. I did not ask who hired her. I did not try to make sure the job was secure. A few days after she started, she sent me a message. "First week, it's weird starting over," I replied. "Probably." She wrote, "Mom hates that I took it." I almost smiled. "Do you?" There was a long pause, then no. It was one of the first answers Courtney had given me in a long time that did not seem designed for an audience. I typed "then start there." She reacted with a thumbs up. I did not know whether that meant we were repairing anything. For once, I did not need to know immediately. Mom still slipped into the old hierarchy sometimes. Courtney's new company was lucky to have her. My job was finally getting the recognition it deserved. I corrected Mom when the comparison became direct, But I stopped treating every imperfect sentence as a problem I had to solve. The biggest difference was that I refused to become the replacement favorite. After the family dinner, Mom had tried to move from Courtney is the successful daughter to we never realized how important Lauren is. I rejected both. There should never have been a winner. Courtney had spent adulthood terrified of losing her role as the impressive daughter. I had spent adulthood pretending I did not need a troll while quietly building another one. Useful daughter, responsible daughter, the one who remembered, the one who fixed, the one who did not need praise because she was too competent to need anything. Neither role had been freedom. Courtney's required applause. Mine required usefulness. By late August, the Navy planner still sat beside my desk. I still used it. I still wrote down things for people I loved sometimes. Dad's birthday, dinner with an old friend, Mom and Dad's anniversary because I wanted to remember it. The difference was why I was no longer keeping the family functioning because I thought that was the price of being valuable. One Sunday, Mom called, "Are you free for dinner?" "For what? No emergency?" She laughed reluctantly. "No emergency?" I thought about it. Okay, that yes felt different too. Boundaries were not only about saying no. They were about making yes mean something again. When I think about the promotion dinner now, I remember Mom's glass, Dad's laugh, Courtney's smile, and Daniel standing after reading my text. But the message I sent him was not the thing that changed me most. Everything afterward was the review where I had to admit a real mistake without allowing Courtney to turn it into something it was not. The moment Courtney admitted she was more afraid of Mom seeing her differently than she was of losing the title. Dad acknowledging that staying out of conflict had always been a choice. Mom's own messages revealing how easily she had accepted a version of me that fit the hierarchy she already preferred, and then all the tiny moments when someone asked me to fix something and I realized I was allowed to decide whether I wanted to. For most of my life, I thought being needed was proof of being valued. It was not. Sometimes people needed me because they trusted me, sometimes because they loved me, sometimes because I was simply the easiest person to call. Those things were not interchangeable. Neither were extension and renewal. Maybe that was why the whole story had always come back to language. Courtney had spent years changing words just enough to change what people believed. Temporary became secure, helpful became responsible, quiet became jealous, competent became useless when nobody bothered to look at the work. I had spent years believing accuracy would protect itself. It does not. Sometimes you have to say the thing clearly. Sometimes you have to put it in writing. Sometimes you have to accept that people may dislike the truth, even after they understand it. And sometimes the smartest decision is not solving the problem in front of you. Sometimes it is recognizing that the problem was never yours. One Monday morning, my phone buzzed while I was getting ready for work. Mom had posted another question in the family group chat. She could not remember the website Dad used to renew one of his memberships. I knew, of course, I knew. The link was probably still saved somewhere on my laptop. I read the message. Dad replied first, "I'll find it." Courtney wrote, "Try the confirmation email." Mom answered that she would. I put my phone face down and picked up my coffee. Then I went to work. For the first time in my life, being useful was still part of who I was. It just was not something my family owned. You learn that being useful does not make you responsible for everyone else's choices. Set boundaries early. Document important facts and correct false stories before they grow. Help people when you choose to, not because they demand it. If you value lessons like this, subscribe and keep watching with